Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto is an intelligent and powerful part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Hiruzen Sarutobi was a tired old man. He was the Sandaime, or the third Hokage, the strongest ninja in Konoha, the Hidden Leaf Village, having survived not only war, but the Kyuubi attack 3 years prior. True, but he was still an old man. His successor and then shortly after predecessor, Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime, or the fourth Hokage, had perished along with his wife, Kushina Uzumaki, the second Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, or the nine-tailed fox. A masked man, whose identity was still unknown, managed to engage in combat with Minato with surprisingly enough, relatively equal skills, and in doing so, managed to locate and force the seal that contained the Kyuubi on his wife's stomach open, thus releasing the Kyuubi upon Konoha, and using the dojutsu known as the Sharingan, he forced the Kyuubi to attack Konoha. The sheer destruction and chaos caused by Kyuubi was so great that the death toll and collateral was even greater than the second and third shinobi wars. Towards the end of this catastrophe, the Yondaime Hokage managed to press his attack and forced his foe to flee. He then turned his attention to the Kyuubi. The Kyuubi, however, was still under the influence of the Sharingan and was spiraling out of control and continued to attack with reckless abandon. The Yondaime's only chance was to reseal the Kyuubi. His only problem was that he couldn't reseal the Kyuubi into his dying wife, Kushina. Having researched various sealing techniques for this very possibility, he knew that the only way to reseal Kyuubi was to use his newborn son, Naruto Uzumaki, Namikaze. So using a forbidden Uzumaki sealing technique known as the Shiki Fuin, or the Death Reaper seal, he managed to seal the Kyuubi at the cost of his own soul and life. Hiruzen arrived on the battlefield shortly after the sealing was complete, accompanied by the leader of the Hokage's private ANBU team, Kakashi Hatake, who was the last of Minato Namikaze's genin team, the infamous Team 7, and there they both bore witness to the final words of the great Yondaime, Minato Namikaze. His only dying wish was to see his only son become a hero for holding the Kyuubi at bay, and with his dying breath warned the Sandaime and final student regarding the fact that, while the seal was strong, it, like the very first seal of the Kyuubi, needed love to help combat the truly vile chakra that Kyuubi was made of in order to reinforce the seal. The Sandaime and Kakashi both swore that his son Naruto would be cared for and protected, even if it cost them their lives to ensure his protection and safety. Minato Namikaze then died with a smile that could only be given by a man that had faith in his village and predecessor, soon to be successor. He, along with his final student Kakashi Hatake, would keep their word. That was almost 4 years ago, and the Sandaime was full of regret and guilt. He had failed Minato completely, and he knew that his successor was probably rolling in his grave at the treatment of his son and heir. It was this reason that he refused to even visit the child. His only comfort was that the Konoha's orphanage was looking after the boy. Then there was Minato's final student Kakashi. Kakashi had dived headfirst into countless missions as he too refused to visit his former teacher's son. For Kakashi, Naruto was the only remaining link to his late father-like figure, but was constantly reminded of the fact that it was his sensei's son's survival that caused his sensei's death. Kakashi knew that he was being childish and stubborn by not even visiting the youth, but he found that he simply couldn't face the child. After all, what could he say to the boy that would make up for 3 years of neglect on his part? Absolutely nothing. So he crushed the feeling of guilt and used the countless missions as an excuse to stay away. Naruto, the heir in question, was silently and cautiously making his way through the village. It was quite late, with the moon full and high in its place in the night sky as it illuminated the streets with its eerie glow, casting the much-needed shadow in the deep places such as the alleyways and hidden corners. Naruto clung to these shadows as he attempted to find a safe place to spend the night, as the orphanage had just kicked him out with nothing but the overly large threadbare t-shirt and a small pair of shorts that he wore constantly. Both pieces of clothing, if you'd call them that, had holes littering them. He was never allowed to wear sandals or socks and was told to be grateful for the clothes that he'd been so kindly gifted. Naruto was an extraordinarily intelligent boy. If one had paid enough attention, they'd have seen the keen intellect, or the sharp eyes that memorized absolutely anything and everything that he saw or heard. It was this keen intellect that had helped him to learn to read, write and speak with a level that befitted a child of at least 10 years of age. He knew, at least, that he was as smart as a shinobi child in that regard, as chakra circulated through their bodies, causing them to be more intelligent than that of regular civilians, or at least far more developed mentally speaking. However, that wasn't Naruto's main concern, as aside from his age and the hate and scorn that he noticed aimed at him, he was more concerned with the other looks he received. Usually he was the victim of various hate-filled glares and mutterings, but sometimes he received other looks. He didn't quite understand why he received these particular looks, but he had a theory. You see, Naruto looked unbelievably feminine. He never knew why he looked or sounded so much more girly than real girls, but the looks he constantly received by the cook and some of the other male staff at the orphanage managed to ring alarm bells to the blonde. The looks caused him to be very nervous around any grown-up man. They were the person/s that gave him the look the most. Naruto was a slim, petite child. With his smooth, long, but length blonde hair and a creamy pale complexion, he was often mistaken for a girl. Though his hair was tangled and dirty from the grimy neighborhood and his skin even paler than normal from the cold weather, His skin too was dirty and smudged by grime. He had a feminine build complete with dainty, delicate features and had eyes so blue that the oceans would be jealous. They were framed perfectly on his face with long, delicate eyelashes that only further highlighted his eyes' natural beauty and depth. Finally, to complete his angelic features, he had delicately soft and pouty lips that were a gentle, feminine pink. All these features made one thing perfectly clear. If he really was a girl, then he would have grown up to look like a true, natural beauty. The kind of beauty that was highly sought after. As such, the workers would give him those looks that made him want to run and hide. The workers had taken to calling him demon brat or QB spawn or their personal favorite abomination when they thought he couldn't hear them. The other children had taken notice of how their elders treated him, with his abnormally pretty features and shy personality, and sought to mimic their potential parents, or carers. So with the encouragement of the matron, their elders and the staff, they too began to mistreat Naruto. They pushed him around and started to call him freak or weirdo, and while these insults weren't as bad or viscous as the adults' insults, to a child of 3, almost 4, they hurt like a blunt kunai to the heart. The children soon found these activities boring and repetitive, as Naruto would never retaliate or stood up for himself, so they began to become increasingly more violent by beating him for longer periods of time. And then they started to change their insults, soon changed to match their elders. Naruto often wondered if the children even understood the words that they had started to copy from their elders, or if they, like he himself, was just desperate to fit in and be adopted. Though anything Naruto did to try and fit in never worked, of course, as the tasks given to him, chores they were called, though Naruto was the only child to be given them, had gotten increasingly more difficult, and if he failed even the smallest of tasks he was deprived of his measly portions of food or beaten by the matron with her nasty walking stick. Naruto wandered the streets for the entire night before resigning himself to sleeping in an old drainage tunnel/pipe that smelled absolutely dreadful for the night. Naruto reasoned that it must have been connected to the Konoha sewage system. He was used to the smell, as it was often one of his chores to clean the piping and plumbing for the orphanage. Once while he was cleaning the tank for the matron, he had been pushed into the network by one of the larger boys at the orphanage, and he had to navigate his way out. Luckily for him, the exit was very close to the orphanage, but unluckily the matron chewed him out and beat him with her walking stick before using the garden hose on full pressure to bathe him. She then sent him inside back into the basement, where his room was without any dry clothes. There were many such occasions where these occurrences took place, but he forced the thoughts out of his mind to try and sleep. He'd need his brain power to search for a more suitable place to sleep for the rest of his life anyway. On his third day after being kicked out, Naruto succeeded in finding a reasonably safe place to sleep. It was a small shed-sized structure, though years of neglect had left only 1.5 walls standing. What was left of the walls were thankfully bricked, or made of stone, and had very few holes on them. This derelict building, or what was left of it, luckily protected Naruto from the harshly cold wind and damp weather that would slowly get colder as it signified the coming of winter. There Naruto stayed for the next week or so, only venturing out to find food or something to act as a makeshift blanket. He was lucky to find an old curtain that was only half damaged by the weather that he could use as both shelter and for said makeshift blanket. Later Naruto was exceptionally happy to find some small, slightly open tins of what tasted like peas. The expiration date couldn't be read, but they hadn't made him sick yet, so he continued to eat them. About 9 days after finding his makeshift home, the weather had started to get progressively colder rather quickly, and to a almost 4-year-old like Naruto that was not good at all. He had already eaten the tins of whatever was in them and had to begin looking soon before the cold got too bad. So steeling his nerves, he stood in search of food. This is very bad, Naruto thought worriedly as he tightened his grip on the curtain that he was using as a blanket in a feeble attempt to block the cold winter's breeze. I can't find any food here, and that means that I'll need to go closer to the village's center. I was almost spotted last time, and the looks on the villagers' faces were worse than the orphanage's workers. Naruto was amazed to see an alleyway that led into the village's center was empty and hesitated briefly before continuing down it. It was then he spotted it. He had just spotted a full garbage can at the other end and started to walk faster into the alleyway, though he never used this one before. The enticing sight of a possible feast of food hiding within that lone garbage can overrode his usually cautious instincts. It was then that Naruto was startled from his thoughts of food by a sudden banging noise coming from right behind him. Quicker than most would expect from someone of his age, Naruto spun around and nervously faced the cause of the noise whilst retightening his grip on the curtain, hoping dearly that it would shield him from who or what caused the noise. Steeling himself, he raised his gaze, and it was a cat. A female cat, to be precise. That was a rich brown in color, and had a red bow that sat on her ear. The cat hissed at Naruto for several minutes, and slowly circled back and forth, as if sizing up her foe, before she suddenly stopped and simply stared at him intently. Naruto had the strangest feeling, as he felt like he was being examined by a deity rather than a cat, as it looked as though the cat was staring right through him. After a further few minutes of being scrutinized, the cat made an odd grunting noise in the back of her throat before she then trotted over to Naruto and began to rub herself against him, purring all the while, and Naruto just couldn't resist. He gracefully sat behind the garbage can in the shadows of the alleyway that they were in and gestured for the cat to come forward. Naruto had never had a friend before, and he loved animals. The cat wasted no time in practically leaping into the effeminate boy's lap and fell victim to the ministrations of the child as she was petted gently. Naruto paused to bring the curtain-turned blanket around them, making sure to be extra careful so as to not scare the adorable purring mess in his lap. With the combined warmth of the cat in his lap and the blanket around them both, Naruto soon began to grow tired. His eyes began to droop, and less than a few minutes later he was asleep. The brown-furred cat peered up at the sleeping boy from her perch that was still the child's lap, and after a few moments of thought, she shuffled as softly and gently as possible to snuggle deeper into the child as to help keep him warm. Konoha's nights were quite cold this time of the year. She'd heard from her owner that it might even snow this winter season. After snuggling into the child to get comfortable, she too drifted into a slumber. Naruto slowly opened his eyes as he awoke and found himself in a strange place. He seemed to be in a sewer, or at least an old waterway. The walls were old, very old, and seemed to be cracking in some areas while other sections seemed beyond repair. Then there was the water that was everywhere. The water level easily reached his thighs, though there was no current. Strange. Another oddity was that there was no awful smell that usually accompanied the Konoha sewage system, having previous experience in knowing that particular smell. It was dark no matter which way he looked, and it added to the strange emptiness that the location gave. It was this lonely, desolate feeling the place gave off that made him feel horribly sad. He glanced behind him when he was sure he heard a slow breathing sound coming from behind him, so he slowly and cautiously got to his feet, and despite his feeling of unease, he found his feet automatically start walking toward the sound. It seemed that his body was instinctively drawn to the direction where the sound originated, and his mind with each and every step told him that the answers to the questions plaguing his mind would be answered if he only reached the source of the sound. So with his mind made up, he took a deep breath and pushed his nervousness to the back of his mind and picked up the pace before his nerves could come back. After many twists and turns, all of which he effortlessly memorized, he arrived at the source. He was standing in a giant room with bars that separated said room and made it look like a giant animal cage, complete with a lock that only had a single piece of paper that simply had "CO" written on it. How strange, Naruto thought as he looked deeply into the darkness of the cage. So it seems you've found your way here after all. How peculiar, spoke a feminine voice in a soft and gentle whisper. Who's there, and where am I? Naruto questioned with a hint of fear in his voice as he strained to see what was behind the bars of the cage. Naruto was now feeling scared. Was there another person here? He suddenly wished that the room wasn't as dark. He wished that the room had access to a light, like the sun. Yes, like the sun, warm and bright light for a cold, dark room such as this. Imagine his and the voice's surprise when they both felt the warm, gentle embrace of the sun. The appearance of the light illuminated the darkness and gave way to the voice's visage. It was a fox with 9 tails that swayed almost hypnotically behind its body, and what appeared to be human-like hands, which were held up in a non-threatening manner. It took several minutes, but once Naruto's mind caught up with his eyes, it all made sense to him. Like a light bulb suddenly dinging, he just understood. The looks, the whispers, and the hate, he began, it all makes sense. I'm looking right at the Kyuubi, the 9-tailed fox. Naruto's mind became a storm of thoughts and questions, and his inner turmoil was clearly expressed on that pretty face of his. It took him 10 minutes to figure out that the Kyuubi was simply observing him and giving him the needed time to come to his own conclusions. For a creature of hate and rage, it sure is patient and pretty. I like its fur, Naruto thought absently, though his inner animal-loving mind woke halfway through his thought process. Why, thank you, child. Patient is not something I've been called in quite some time, and I'm rather flattered that you like my fur. It is pretty, isn't it? Though don't mistake my silence as patience. I was merely interested as to how you're here when it is not only too early to be acquainted with each other. But I also did not summon you to this plane, said the Kyuubi as it continued to stare at the child in front of its cage. The Kyuubi raised itself to its full height, and then spoke once more. All things considered, though, it is not an unwelcome visit. It is terribly lonely down here. As Naruto gazed around the giant room, his confusion was evident, so the Kyuubi continued. We are in your mind, child. A place where your subconscious meets mine. But it seems that I've neglected proper decorum and failed to introduce myself. I am Kurama, the 9-tailed demon fox, 9th Bija of the 9 Bija, Empress of the Fox clan, and finally your prisoner. Naruto blinked. Then he blinked again. Then his brain finally rebooted itself. He sucked in a breath and gazed up in awe upon the form of the Kyuubi no Kurama. His mind supplied. Well? Began the amused female voice of Kurama. Surely you understand manners and decorum? Kurama heaved a deep sigh at Naruto's confused look before continuing. I have formally introduced myself, child, so please do me the courtesy of doing the same. That snapped Naruto out of his reverie. Forgive me, Miss Kurama. Naruto sheepishly bowed in respect, surprising Kurama greatly. My name is Naruto. Just Naruto, as I'm unsure of my last name. I'm 3, almost 4 years old, and well, that's all, I'm afraid. He bowed again nervously for good measure, and thought I hope that was okay. I've never had to introduce myself before. Kurama eyed the child before heaving another sigh. It seems like my work is cut out for me. Decorum will have to be added to what I will teach you. Naruto started at that and nervously looked up at Kurama. Teach? You wish to teach me? Forgive my surprise, but you are regarded as a creature of rage and malice. He quickly caught himself at the stern look Kurama was giving him, and he stuttered out. I mean, we've only just met and I know nothing about you but your name and titles. Kurama continued to look upon Naruto sternly before conceding to his point. I suppose you are correct, nevertheless we are stuck with each other, and I will not have a rude, noisy, or uncouth girl as my vessel. As for your name, you were born Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, though I find it such a strange name for a girl. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze? That's my name? I like it. Naruto mused with a dreamy expression, then he blinked, then coughed, then finally blushed as he replied, I'm a boy Kurama-san. Kurama looked at him in disbelief, then blinked and quietly whispered, please give me a moment. Kurama's eyes glazed over as she began to dive through Naruto's childhood memories, and after 15 minutes or so she returned and blushed as she replied, forgive me, child. Your appearance seems to be a result of my being sealed into you. You see, my previous hosts were both female, Mito Uzumaki Senju and Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. Who was your mother, by the way? Had the unknown cough benefit of having my pheromones and chakra affect them? Most assume that I am either male or genderless, but of course neither is true. I am a female, and as such my chakra enhances and augments the natural beauty of my host. As I was sealed before your chakra coils were formed, my, shall we say, excess chakra saturated your body and did what my chakra does best. Change your genetic makeup to be naturally beautiful, and in your unfortunate case, womanly or feminine. You will actually become progressively more beautiful as you age until you reach about 16 or 17 years. Sorry about that. Naturally, Naruto was embarrassed to know that he was going to look like a beautiful woman when he grew up, as he'd imagined growing out of the pretty and girly stage and into a man of outstanding quality, that is to say, a manly man. He was instantly depressed as a result of his dreams of being manly shattered. I'm going to look like a pretty girl forever? Why? Does Kami hate me or something? He thought morosely. It was then that Kurama's revelation completely sunk in. Mother? She knows my mother, she knows my name, of course it'd make sense for her to know my mother as well. You knew my mother? He asked quietly, and at that moment, for the first time in their meeting, did Kurama finally see the vulnerable child that Naruto truly was. Does that mean you know who my father was too? You must tell me, please. He sounds so small, so fragile, Kurama thought sadly as she gazed down upon Naruto. She decided right then and there that she'd raise Naruto. Raise him to be a person that would do his parents' memories justice. Naruto was suddenly blinded as Kurama was engulfed in her bright red chakra. Her form began to shrink and change until eventually she transformed into what looked like an 18-year-old woman with soft features, similar to Naruto's features in fact, and though her floor-length blood-red hair and eyes stood out, they didn't subtract from her obvious beauty. She stood there in a plain dark blue, almost black sundress. It was simple in design, but it showed off her graceful curves and beauty. Naruto stood there frozen and stunned as she transformed, and once she had finished he found himself thinking of another red-haired woman with the same hair where the image of this woman came from he didn't know. Perhaps a distant memory, but when she stood there in front of him with her arms stretched out as if inviting him into her embrace with a tender smile he'd seen other young women give the other children, he didn't think twice. Naruto practically leapt into her arms, and he wept as she held him gently yet firmly. Yes, Naruto, I knew your mother quite well. Your father not so much, but he was a kind man and a shinobi of great charisma and courage. Through the eyes of your mother I witnessed his kindness and his character. You remind me of him, you know, and though your appearance mostly come from your mother aside from your hair and eye color, your mother Kushina thought your father was girly too. She giggled the last bit. She continued to talk about his mother and father, as she held Naruto closer to herself, as he desperately clung to her like a lifeline. Per Naruto, this is your very first hug, isn't it? The first time you've been embraced, and it was given to you by a demon. Naruto sniffled quietly to himself as he simply absorbed the warmth and security that surrounded and embraced him through the hug. This is wonderful, he thought to himself as he snuggled further into the warmth. It's alright, Naruto, it's alright now. I'm not going anywhere, I'll be right here. Shh, Kurama soothingly whispered into his ear as her blood-red hair covering Naruto like a safety blanket. It only made him feel even more safe in her arms, and eventually his tears slowed and became sniffles and sobs. Better? She asked gently. When he timidly nodded, she smiled that tender smile and continued. Your father was the Yondaime, and his name was Minato Namikaze. Know right now, Naruto, that he had no choice but to seal me within you, so please don't despise him for doing what needed to be done. Naruto thought upon what Kurama had just told him, and despite his first feeling of betrayal, he then felt nothing. Absolutely nothing at all. He wasn't feeling angry or betrayed. If anything, he felt content. While it was true he was saddened to know that his father died, he felt relief at knowing it was Kurama sealed within him, and not a mindless being. That reminded him, why did you attack Konoha, Kurama-san? He asked quietly. If not for her augmented hearing she would have never heard him. But she did, and sadly it was a question she hoped wouldn't come until much later. You see, Nero, I was forced out of your mother's seal. A masked man with formidable combat skills managed to force the seal open, and the first thing I saw as I was forcibly drawn out was his Sharingan. Nero, there is a way to control a bijou, and the Sharingan's evolved stage known as Mangekyo holds the ability to hypnotize a bijou into doing the user's bidding. I'm not proud of what I did that day. Controlled or not, I was still the one who did the damage. She lowered her head in shame and whispered out, Do you hate me now? Naruto didn't say anything at first, and that scared Kurama more than the Sharingan itself, but he shuffled in her embrace to look at her. She sucked in a breath when she looked into his eyes. It was a deadly technique, the look he was giving her. So innocent, so adorable, it took all her self-control not to scream kawaii and hug the boy to death. Eventually, though, he spoke his thoughts. No, he whispered, his voice hoarse, I don't hate you, Kurama-san. How could I? You've done more for me than anyone in my life so far. You told me about my parents, you want to teach me, and you're really nice and pretty. So no, Kurama-san. I don't hate you. Why, you could say I'm glad it's you who's sealed into me. You could have been a real instead, you know. Language, young man. She snapped. You will never use that language in front of me again, understand, Naru? Yes, Kurama-san, ma'am. Naruto replied instantly, then began to whine. Wait? Naru? That's a girly way to say my name, tough. I like it, and it suits my precious little Naru. And no more, Kurama-san. You can be more personal, you know. She giggled out before gently petting his hair. Naruto began to subconsciously lean into Kurama's ministrations and blushed as he let out a purr momentarily. Kurama giggled at him, and he pouted cutely. Mao. Kurama-chan, please don't laugh at me, Naruto whispered pathetically as he tilted his head and looked up at her with a cute little pout. He reminded her of a baby fox from her clan, and this time she couldn't hold back the urge. Kawaii! She exclaimed loudly, burying his face in her ample chest. She rubbed her face against the top of his head. After holding on to him a little while longer, she gently released him. It's time to wake up now, Naru. Kurama whispered tenderly. Then, at seeing the look on his face, continued, I'll be with you always, Naru. I'll open a mind link so that we can talk, it's so I can train you as well. Naruto tilted his head in thought, and then finally asked, can you teach me to be a shinobi as well, Kurama-chan? She smiled at him, then kissed his forehead. An action Naruto decided that he liked. She nodded her head to him in agreement, and shooed him off with a final hug and kiss to the forehead. My little Naru. I'll teach you to be the best you can be. That was the last thing Naruto heard as his mind pulled him out of his mindscape. His body shivered though, as that last bit was laced with a sadistic tone that made him very nervous. Naruto drowsily opened his eyes, but he instantly winced at the harsh light that had crept up on him during his lovely meeting with Kurama, and he pulled the curtain up to let his eyes focus themselves. I thought it was lovely too, Naru-chan. He heard in his head. Naruto whipped his head around the alley searching for the source, hoping deep within that she existed outside his mind. Oh my dear, sweet Naru-chan. I may not be with you physically, but I will always be with you wherever you go. The soft, delicate voice of Kurama whispered to him, comforting him instantly. Just think of what you wish to say to me and I'll be able to hear you, little one. Mao. Kurama-chan, I'm not that little. Naruto thought petulantly. I'll be big and strong when I grow up. Kurama giggled in his mind and he sent her a mental pout. I wonder if he remembers what I said last night. The poor thing has forgotten that he'll never be big and strong, he will forever be soft and delicate like a girl. Kurama thought to herself. She then smirked mischievously as her thoughts continued. Oh my Kami, he'll forever be adorable. I'm so glad I was sealed within this child. I may already love him like my own kid, but I am a fox, he'll be so much fun to tease you, Fufufu. For some unknown reason Naruto felt a chill run down his spine and that feeling of unease returned. I feel nervous all of a sudden, Kurama, is there anything wrong? He asked her. No, nothing at all, she said to him before quietly finishing with, little one, you Fufufu. Naruto sighed to himself before he recognized the feeling of being watched. He very carefully glanced up from his seat behind the garbage can to see the cat that he had been petting the previous night sitting in front of him, licking her paw whilst watching him from the corner of her eye. She continued to clean herself for a few more minutes until she finished with a contented and pleased huff. She then proceeded to trot over and butt her head softly against his leg before she peeked nonchalantly to his lap. Naruto followed her gaze to see half a piece of roasted chicken breast sitting there innocently. The piece of roasted chicken was cold, very cold, but it was food and Naruto's stomach rumbled its displeasure of being empty. Did you bring me this to eat, Kitty-chan? Naruto asked quietly. What about you? The cat actually seemed to understand Naruto, which in itself was odd, but he wasn't going to turn down the offered food. He had gotten rather used to old and cold food after all, and the fact that it was most likely from the nearby garbage can never even faze the blonde with dirty and tangled hair. The cat mewed at Naruto, and he found himself shocked to be able to understand the cat's mewling as if it was speaking the human tongue. Kurama-chan? Am I going crazy? He hesitantly asked. The cat said that she's already eaten and I understood her. No, Naru-chan. You're not going crazy. As my host you will find you'll be able to understand most animals. Perks of being unofficially affiliated with the Fox clan. Kurama replied, you'll find that understanding animals like felines or canines far better, though it'll take practice, but you'll soon be able to communicate with all creatures. Just as I can, little one. Oh, Naruto answered dumbly as he was already dreamily imagining the things he could learn just from the various animals that were in and around Konoha. Though he was snapped out of his reverie by the brown-furred cat, she must have gotten impatient as she decided to claw his big toe that had become visible from under the cover of the curtain. Ouch, Naruto squeaked. I'm sorry, Kitty-chan, I didn't mean to ignore you. The cat huffed and mewed at him once more. Tora? Your name is Tora? He gently asked the cat. The cat Tora seemed to startle and stare at Naruto further before nodding very slowly, unsure as to whether or not the pretty and nice human child could actually understand her. Tora mewed. Nope, you're not crazy, Tora-chan, I really do understand what you're saying. Really, I'm serious. Naruto answered cheerfully before pitifully whining out a hey, stop looking at me like that, Tora-chan. Wow, that was a mean thing to say, Tora-chan. Naruto pouted as he crossed his arms. Naruto gasped, then blushed, then timidly whispered, why you said a bad word, Tora-chan. Kurama-chan says using that kind of language is bad. Tora stared flatly at Naruto for a few minutes, then huffed. Oh? Then you're forgiven, Tora-chan. Naruto chirped brightly. Tora sighed and then finally gestured once more to the chicken, and Naruto got the message, eat now. So Naruto ate. His eyes suddenly widened and sparkled gloriously. This is amazing, Databeo. He winced as he received a sudden pain in his head. Naruto-chan, Kurama begun menacingly. That verbal tick must go. A lady must always speak clearly, for you are not a barbarian. Kurama-chan. I'm a boy, remember. Naruto replied in a whine with an eye twitch. It matters not, she huffed. You must speak clearly from now on, and here's your first lesson as a shinobi. Use everything at your disposal to your own benefit. Your feminine appearance is a plus to you. Both men and women will be enamored by your beauty, so regardless of whether or not you look like a girl, you must learn to act as a girl. Being underestimated is a useful tool, Naruto-chan, do you understand? I get it. So if I act like a girl, then other shinobi or kunoichi will underestimate me and be in for a nasty shock later when they find out that I'm really a boy, he exclaimed with a smile worthy of a kitsune as Kurama's words were instantly absorbed by his eidetic-like memory. Tora hissed. Bringing Naruto back to reality, he looked at Tora and thanked her profusely for finding him food. Tora waved her tail in a dismissive fashion before jerking her head, gesturing for Naruto to follow. Naruto followed Tora through many twists and turns. All were effortlessly memorized, before the duo emerged in front of a grand manor. The manor or castle, yes, castle was huge and was clearly designed for royalty. Tora seemed to suck in a breath, as if bracing herself, before jumping through an open window, Naruto following after another look from Tora. He followed as Tora led him through the castle, stopping when she stopped and sticking to the walls when she demanded him to do so. He assumed that it was to avoid any unnecessary contact with the various staff running about to and fro. Less than 5 minutes later they reached a beautiful sitting room. Naruto, despite his usually overcautious nature, failed to realize, though, that the room had 2 people already enjoying the warm sun that the room was naturally gifted with. There was a man and a woman. Both were immaculately dressed with clothes of humble yet exquisite taste, and they were already seated at a perfectly sized table quietly drinking tea. The silence was shattered with a joyous shriek of Tora-chan. Naruto immediately jumped and ran towards the corner of the room, seeking the safe feeling of the walls behind him. He attempted to try and sink further into the corner when the attention of the other occupants snapped to his trembling form. Tora immediately bounded over and proceeded to try to comfort and calm the child by mewing and rubbing against him in a gentle fashion. The 2 occupants shared a look before the woman slowly stepped forward, as not to further startle the absolutely filthy child. Madame Keiru Shinji, the fire daimyo's wife, was enjoying a peaceful morning as she was currently enjoying tea and biscuits with her husband. Her only concern, though, was that her dearest Tora-chan had fled the castle last night for some reason that she couldn't fathom. They were enjoying a lovely cuddle, smother, but Tora had managed to wriggle free and fled out the window and didn't come back that night. She'd asked the servants to keep an eye out, and here was her Tora, trotting into the room followed by a pretty little child that was covered in dirt and grime. Her first instinct was to run and comfort the dirty child, but after witnessing both the child's extreme reaction to her joy and Tora's interaction with the filthy child, she had immediately stopped. Madame Keiru Shinji was a rather plump woman of 35 years of age. She was dressed in the latest coat available on the market to cover her plumpness, and she always made sure there was a hood so that if she wore it, it wouldn't mess up her hairstyle. She had dark brown hair that, while it was down now, was usually meticulously styled into a bun. Her usual makeup, already done, consisted of eyeshadow of a most interesting shade of pale purple, and she wore a common yet expensive pink lipstick. Her husband, the fire daimyo, by comparison looked much different. The fire daimyo, a man named Masahiko Shinji, a man of 38 years, was a thin man compared to his wife, and the other nobles often chuckled at the difference. He too often found himself sharing a laugh or two with his, still to his eyes, beautiful wife in regards to their different sizes. The daimyo had dark gray, almost black round eyes. They were eyes common to the land of fire, and as such he'd inherited the common yet distinguished trait, and he possessed dark, brown, almost black-colored shoulder-length hair that had minute traces of gray along the sides of his head. He generally wore his tailor-made kimono that was made in the finest yet hardy of silks, as unlike other daimyos he didn't care much for the flimsy kimonos and robes worn by them, especially since they weren't reliable if he had to get his hands dirty. The courts actually highly respected his intellectual prowess, and that combined with his "I don't mind getting my hands dirty" approach often provided him with the upper hand whenever the other daimyos convened to discuss trade and peace. Being the single most influential and not to mention the richest person in all of the land of fire, he had the first and last say in the land of fire. In other words, his word was law, and as such, even the Hokage was powerless against his commands. That being said, Konoha, the village hidden in the leaf, served his country, his court, and most importantly his family. Family, that was something that hit him hard every time he thought upon the subject, as while he and his wife were very much in love, she was infertile. Keiru Shinji was unable to have children, and he as fire daimyo must produce or name an heir by the time of his, hopefully long life ended. They both tried many times and many options before Kaoru offered a suggestion. Take a second wife, so after trying a little more he took his beloved wife's advice and eventually took a concubine as a second bride. That way he was still legally able to have an heir ascend to the throne upon his death. The concubine that he had chosen and courted accordingly was named Yuki. Yuki was an exceptionally beautiful woman of about 30 years and had long flowing white hair. She had a delicate porcelain-like complexion and beautiful amethyst-colored eyes. Yuki possessed a sweet, kind disposition that caused her to fit right in with the daimyo's family. Even Madame Shinji was not disgusted with her presence. In fact, Madame Shinji often discussed politics with her, and made it her personal duty to spend a lovely meal or drink tea with her as often as could be spared. Yuki, however, harbored a deep and dark secret. It was not a secret that was unknown to the daimyo's family, of course, but it was a secret that was kept from the rest of the shinobi world. For you see, her white hair and delicate features were a result of her heritage, but her heritage they were hiding was that she part of the extinct Kagaya clan, and though she had never awakened the Kagaya clan's infamous Kekkai Genkai or bloodline limit known as the Shikatsumiyaku or Dead Bone Pulse, she was still considered dangerous by the other countries that made up the elemental nations. The fire daimyo Masahiko and his wife Kaoru, however, didn't care though, and made sure they told her so daily so that she truly felt at home and at peace with them, and happy and at peace was exactly what she felt every day. Snapping out of her reverie, Kaoru shared a look with her husband as she slowly moved forward towards Naruto, as if approaching a cornered animal. Kaoru made no sudden movements and slowly held her hand out to the frightened child and gestured for said child to come forward, all the while she was smiling gently. Naruto regarded her cautiously for a moment before seeing her smile at him. It was like Kurama-chan's smile, and he liked that smile. So Naruto slowly unwound himself from the tight ball he had been curled up in and timidly took her hand. Madame Shinji smiled serenely at him and pulled him gently to his feet. There now, child, we won't hurt you. She spoke softly, still not wanting to scare the pretty child. She began coaxing him out further with a biscuit from the tea she was sharing with her husband in the silence before, and Naruto cautiously took the biscuit, and with growing courage finally spoke. Pardon me, ma'am? What is this? Is it food? His voice was quiet, gentle and feminine, and rang with a tinkling sound that mesmerized Kaoru and her husband. The child's face looked so hopeful at the last part of the question. Hadn't this child ever had a biscuit before? Granted, these particular biscuits were imported from the land of tea, where all the best tea and biscuits came from, but a child that had truly never had a biscuit, such a simple piece of food, was unbelievable to the woman. Yes, little one, it's called a biscuit, and it's a very sweet snack. You usually eat them with milk or tea, she kindly explained. A small, amazingly beautiful smile blossomed on the child's face as he whispered the word to himself as if testing it on his tongue. He then looked up at her with his head tilted in contemplation. Kawaii. She mentally squealed before he sniffed the biscuit. He paused and seemed to be preparing himself to eat it, treating the biscuit as if it could be poisoned. What a life this child must have lived, she thought sadly as her mind was racing with questions. Go on, Naruto-chan. He heard Kurama gently say in his mind, I sense no negative intentions from the two people here or the other woman behind you. Naruto sniffed it once more before nibbling the end of the biscuit carefully. His eyes widened and sparkled like precious gems, and he again captivated the room with his smile. Naruto then began nibbling more fervently, thinking that it must be priceless or expensive food that was clearly only fit for royalty, and in the back of his mind Kurama shed a tear and mentally cursed the villagers. In the real world, the now 3 occupants in the room had a feeling of dread settle in the pits of their stomachs as they watched the child nibble and savor the biscuit as if it would disappear. This precious child was clearly an orphan, but the Fire Daimyo and Madame Shinji had personally donated sweets, biscuits, and the like every week. So either the child had never lived in the orphanage, which was impossible as Hai no Kuni or the Land of Fire had the lowest homeless rate in the elemental nations, so low in fact that it was practically non-existent, or there was something clearly wrong with this picture. The Fire Daimyo was inclined to believe the latter of the options, and that concerned him. He snapped to attention as Naruto finished nibbling on the biscuit, leaving just about half remaining with a dreamy expression on his face. He suddenly looked very nervous once more, and seconds later, he timidly held the other half of the biscuit back out to Madame Shinji. This must have been really expensive, ma'am, and I'm sorry I ate so much of it. Here, there's some left. He timidly bowed, though he smiled proudly when he mentioned that there was some of the biscuit left. He was proud of his self-control. Yuki Kagaya, who had entered the room shortly after, had taken the offered treat, instantly looked to the daimyo with a heartbroken and pleading expression, and the Fire Daimyo instantly understood what she was saying. I want her. Masahiko Shinji smiled softly and silently nodded to Yuki. The smile she gave him clued Madame Shinji in, and she also nodded her head in agreement to the silent plan. Yuki gracefully stepped forward and knelt before Naruto, who was now eyeing her wearily, his body coiled and ready to flee if he had to. Imagine Naruto's surprise when she spoke to him with such a musical tone of voice that he instantly thought must have belonged to an angel, though he promptly blushed when she giggled softly, and it was then he realized that he must have said that out loud. How embarrassing, he thought to himself. Child, my name is Yuki Kagaya. What is your name, little one? She asked softly. Naruto pouted cutely as he heard Kurama giggle in the back of his mind to her question. I'm not little Kagaya-san. He chided in a delicate tone that had the females in the room, and his mind, squealing mentally, and the daimyo feel oddly protective of the child. Naruto tried to look stern. Really he did, but it was absolutely adorable coming from the child. And my name Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, he finished softly but proudly. Naruto? Yuki repeated questioningly and as if muttering to herself, just a little too loudly, continued, odd name for a girl. The fire daimyo and Madame Shinji mentally agreed with her statement as they looked once more to Naruto's adorably scrunched up face. Yuki, Madame Shinji and Kurama had to physically, or mentally in Kurama's case, restrain themselves from smothering the child by hugging their arms around themselves. The fire daimyo wasn't faring any better as his arms twitched to hug the adorable creature standing before them. For you see, Naruto was now pouting, but not his normal pout, no. This was a devastating pout that, coupled with the teary puppy eyes he was unconsciously using and the sudden pathetic whine he gave, made him seem like a fox kit, or a kitten that was just doused in water. Tora, who had remained vigilant and standing beside the child, however had no such restraint, and immediately jumped up onto Naruto's shoulders and started rubbing her head against his cheek in comfort. And was she starting to groom him? Yes, she is grooming you. Like a mother cat to her kitten, you seem to give her the impression of being a kitten in need of being cared for. Kurama giggled, though her giggle became a laugh soon after. I'm sorry Naruchan, but it's just so funny. Whilst Kurama tried, and failed, to control herself, the three other occupants in the real world were simply amazed. Tora was never this well behaved or close with anyone. That settles it, the child staying with us, was the collective thoughts of room's occupants. Meanwhile, Naruto was nervously trying to get Tora to stop grooming his cheek, as it not only made him feel weird but it also tickled. Mao, Tora-chan, please stop. That tickles Tora-chan. Naruto giggled as he was relentlessly assaulted by the cat in question. Whilst the adorable scene continued and the women gushed over said scene, the rest of Naruto's name finally registered with the daimyo, and he certainly knew that name. It wasn't hard after all. After all, the Namikaze clan was a very infamous clan. They were utter demons on the battlefield, especially if angered, and their speed was only rivaled by the Jintan or swift-release users of Kumo. They were feared so much that the clan was hunted to extinction, and as such, there were only two known survivors, Dan Namikaze and Minato Namikaze. Minato Namikaze, he was a supposed orphan from the war, but the fire daimyo knew differently, for the former survivor Dan Namikaze was subsequently also Minato's father. Why anyone never put the two pieces together was rather simple, for Minato's mother was the legendary Tsunade Senju. No one had known that Dan Namikaze and Tsunade Senju married in secret, or that the fire daimyo was the one to preside over their union. As the last of the Senju clan and a woman, she was bound by her clan's laws, and as such Dan Namikaze took his wife's clan name, and became Dan Senju. Dan met an untimely death during the war, and it was due to his early death that they never announced their union to the village. Masahiko Shinji knew all this because it was just after Dan's death and right before she left Konoha that Tsunade came to him seeking sanctuary, and as the last of the Senju, once more, it was impossible for him to decline her request. It wasn't only that though, as he was indebted to her for finding out why he and his beloved wife Kaoru were unsuccessful in having children. The many court healers proved to be rather useless, as they just kept recommending medicine after medicine, but it was Tsunade that found out why his wife was unable to conceive. As requested, Tsunade had sanctuary there at his castle in Konoha until she had given birth a healthy baby boy, a son that Tsunade rejected, and as such she refused to name him. For each and every time that she looked at the child, all she could see was her dead husband, and all she felt was her heartbreak. As soon as she could, Tsunade left with the child and placed him in a random orphanage, claiming she had simply found the child and that she only knew his last name, and left. She never returned to Konoha after that, but rumor had it that she took her husband's niece Shizen with her. Hopefully she'd return one day and be healed from her scars and would have made peace with her inner demons. It was only when Minato was named the fourth Hokage that he saw that little boy again. He had recognized him immediately, and ordered a blood test done to be absolutely sure it was him. The results were positive. Minato Namikaze was without a shred of a doubt the son of Tsunade Senju, the slug Sannin, and her deceased husband Dan Senju, formerly Namikaze. Then there was the Uzumaki in Naruto's name. The feeling of dread had returned instantly for his country. His court and his very family owed a debt to the Uzumaki family when they were still residents of Yuzu no Kuni, or the land of whirlpools. The Uzumaki family was royalty in every sense of the word, and when Yuzu fell in the war to a surprise attack launched by the recently formed alliance of Kumo, Kiri, and Iwa, without the support of their daimyos, he might add, their only daughter, Kushina, was the only survivor of the royal family. She then moved to Konoha and became the second Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox. Oh yes, he knew all about the Kyubi. First with the battle of Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha that ended up with Hashirama's wife, Mito Uzumaki Senju, becoming the very first host. Then as Mito started to pass on, the responsibility was passed on to another member of the Uzumaki royal family, Kushina Uzumaki. Throughout many trials and tribulations, Kushina found acceptance with her friends, her new home, and her lover, who eventually became her husband, Minato Namikaze. Then finally, the Kyubi attack. According to the official report from his spies, Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze passed on shortly after childbirth, as she fought to her last breath against the Kyubi no Kitsune. Minato had then surrendered his life force and soul over to the Shinigami or Death God for the power to save the village by sealing the Kyuubi away into a child, Minato's only child, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. So with all the facts laid before him, the Fire Daimyo came to the inevitable conclusion: Naruto was who he says he was. He was Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, heir to the Namikaze clan, descendant of the Senju clan, heir to the Uzumaki royal family and to the throne of Yuzu, and finally, the third Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox. The Fire Daimyo was trying to control the raging inferno that was his anger. Heads would roll for this travesty. This child was royalty, and he was treated in such a manner as this like he was filth? Hiruzen, you and Konoha shall suffer for this. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but you will suffer for your actions, or rather your inaction soon. The daimyo swore to himself. Madame Shinji looked up in time to see her husband's expression, and she couldn't resist the feeling of fear. Her husband's look was truly terrifying, and she swallowed heavily. She had not seen that look on his face since the attempted coup instigated by the Guardians of the Ninja 12 last year. It was a look that held no mercy and a look that swore vengeance. Konoha has not heard the last of this. She thought to herself with a shiver, I almost pity them, almost. Inside Naruto's mind, Kurama had sensed the daimyo's intentions and smirked. Perhaps things were looking up for her dear little Naru after all. Naruto couldn't remember a time where he felt so at peace with himself or around others, but with the warm feeling soothing him from his mind. Definitely coming from Kurama, his mind registered, coupled with the gentle embrace of the pretty lady holding him, kept the feeling pulsing through his little body. He vaguely heard the adults murmuring and whispering with each other, and while that usually translated as run for it for Naruto, for some strange reason his body refused to move. It was simply wonderful for Naruto, and one could tell if they were to witness the dreamy expression of utter bliss plastered onto his soft face. He was brought from his blissful little dream world when Yuki gently petted his hair, as if to gain his attention. It worked, of course, too well in the adults' opinions as he leaned into Yuki's ministrations and sighed contently. The women giggled, and it was then that Naruto really snapped out of it. Pouting cutely, he let his attention drift to Yuki, who had just stopped petting him. Naru-chan? You must be hungry and you certainly need a bath, so how about we get you cleaned up and into some fresh, clean clothes? We'll then go get you some food, okay? Yuki said in her musical tone. Kurama-chan? Why does everyone that's nice to me insist on calling me Naru? Or little one? Naruto whined to his weight. What was the right term of endearment for Kurama? Certainly not prisoner tenant, perhaps? No, that wasn't right either. She's nice like what I pictured a mum to be like, and her hugs are really soft and nice. Here his nose crinkled adorably, but doesn't look like the other mums I've seen. I feel close to her though, like family. Ha. Kurama-chan? Can I please call you big sister? He finished with a mental version of his radiant smile. Kurama was still wondering how the Fire Daimyo was going to avenge her dear Naru-chan while unconsciously sending wave after wave of soothing chakra to hug her little one, when her thoughts were interrupted by Naruto's questions and his own thoughts reached her. She blinked, and her eyes began to mist over, but it was the smile that caused the tears to flow and affect her most. Yes. Of course you can, Naru-chan, Kurama cried, tears of happiness still flowing. Of course you can call me big sister. No, even better. You can call me Kurane and I'll simply call you Naru. She trailed off, about to go into her own world, when Naruto interrupted her. Kurane? Are you okay? You went silent for a little while, Kurane? Oh. Naruto must have thought something bad happened. His mental face was expressing his worry. Kawaii. She thought, I'm fine, Naru. Just happy. She trailed off in the end with a slight drop of blood leaving her nose as she went into a mini coma of bliss, her thoughts running off on their own. Yufa. My little Naru is so sweet. Nah? Kurane, my question? Naruto nervously asked, and what was that weird vibe I felt just now, Kurane? Wiping her nose quickly, Kurama coughed before finally answering, you are little Naru. Though most would use the term petite and utterly gorgeous. Yufu. Cough? Weird vibe? You must be imagining it, Naru. Yes, it's just your imagination, Kurama nervously finished. Please buy it. Please buy it. Please buy it. Oh, okay, Kurane, was Naruto's oblivious reply. Kurama released a sigh of relief. That was close, she thought. Naru? The other people are staring at you now. Remember to show respect, as these are very important people, okay? Yes, Kurane, was the dutiful reply. Back in the real world, Yuki was trying to bring Naruto back. He just zoned out completely and had been unresponsive for the last 5 minutes or so. Tora was trying to help by butting her head against her new favorite human and mewling. Naru-chan? 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 Yuki didn't know what was wrong. Was he injured or sick? She spun to let the other occupants know something was wrong when she heard his breathing return to normal. Naru-chan? She tried once more, and he finally looked up at the room's occupants with those eyes, chewing on his lower lip nervously. Oh my Kami! I'm going to have to start beating people away with a stick, thought the daimyo with a heavy sigh, and after a second glance, his arm twitched dangerously. A really long stick. Nah? I'm sorry, Yuki-san. I was talking with Kurane. Naruto whispered out. Kurane? All three adults asked simultaneously whilst Tora just tilted her head questioningly. Eh? Ah. Kurane is Kurama-chan, She's really pretty and nice like all of you that is, and we met last night even though the orphanage threw me out over a week ago. Kurama-chan is the QB and she's going to teach me to be a shinobi. He rambled excitedly. Kurama facepalmed. Should have told him not to mention me, she sighed, though a moment later she giggled dreamily. He said that I was really pretty. She smiled dreamily once more before realizing that she had to pay attention, though the light drop of blood was left unnoticed. Naruto's statement caused alarm bells to ring in the daimyo's head. QB? He was communicating with the QB and it had a name? While he had read the journals of his forefathers, hence his knowledge about Hashirama versus Madara, the only entry that sounded familiar was a passage written by one of his deceased relatives after talking with the Uzumaki royal family after the very first sealing, as they had talked about how the QB was different from their old texts. QB was originally appointed by its creator, a god in a man's body whose name slipped his mind, to watch over the balance of peace throughout the lands. The QB and its brethren, the other-tailed Bijou, did their govern task for many years, but like all things pure, there will always be people to try and corrupt that purity. Through the human race, the Bijou witnessed true horrors, such as the horrors of war, greed and hatred. As the Bijou continued their appointed tasks, that hatred and greed grew, war became more destructive, and finally, when all was said and done, the humans turned that hatred and greed upon the Bijou themselves. The Bijou were sick of watching what their father, their creator, had given them being used in such ways, and when the humans turned against them, the Bijou snapped and fought back. Sheer destruction covered the land. One conflict after another, each longer than the last, and finally a single man stood tall. This man possessed the chakra of their father, as they'd have recognized it anywhere, of course, and slowly, one by one, the Bijou remembered themselves as they were subdued by this man and his chakra. The man's name was Hashirama Senju. The QB was the only Bijou left untouched after the ferocious battle. Faced with the choice of flee or be captured, QB chose to flee, and flee QB did. For years not even the strongest sensor could pinpoint the QB's location until that man came, Madara Uchiha. This man, like the last, had inherited something of their father's, his eyes, the Sharingan. Using its evolved stage known as Mangekyo, he managed to cast a genjutsu or illusion so powerful that even the mighty QB fell victim to Madara Uchiha's whims, for he ensnared the QB and forced it under his control. An epic battle of monstrous proportions waged against both the men, with their battle reshaped the very land on which they fought. The creator's chakra versus the creator's eyes. Madara used his formidable battle prowess, the Sharingan and the QB, while Hashirama used his own battle prowess with sealed weapons, his natural ability to subdue the hate-filled chakra that QB was radiating, and finally, his fabled Mokutan, or would release. In the end, according to history anyway, the creator's chakra won. Hashirama Senju defeated Madara Uchiha in mortal combat, and with the help of his wife Mito Uzumaki Senju, they sealed the QB away within her body. Shortly after this epic battle, Hashirama Senju as Shodaime, or the first Hokage, gifted the Bijou as a notion to peace between the elemental nations. Sadly, said peace didn't last, and something that should have never been forgotten was forgotten. The Bijou became monsters of man's own design, much like the Jinchuriki in the various hidden villages. Jinchuriki literally translated as the power of human sacrifice, and were the sacrificial vessels in which the various hidden villages sealed the Bijou into, and as such, Jinchuriki were hated and scorned. Jinchuriki were treated as tools of war, and tools that weren't very well looked after. Jinchuriki tended to be ignored or abused by the very villages that they were supposed to protect. Looking at Naruto was a perfect example. Dirty rags that shouldn't even be used as clothes, no sandals or socks, and he certainly looked well beyond malnourished and bordering on deathly thin, even though it made him look even daintier and more fragile, and therefore prettier. Then a thought hit the daimyo. If Naruto was this pretty, then had anyone tried doing things to him? He growled in his throat and swallowed his anger to the best of his abilities. It wouldn't do any good to have Naruto scared of him. He chanced that look at Naruto to see if he'd scared him, and choked on his breath. It was that doused kitten look again. He heard the women shuffle closer to Naruto, and his arm twitched once more. Control, you are in control. He chanted to himself mentally like a mantra over and over again. Once positive that he was indeed okay, looked right back up and once more fell victim as Naruto, who thought they were mad at him, let out a hiccuped sob. For a creature as adorable as Naruto, the hiccuped sob was made at just the right moment, and immediately crippled all defenses raised up by the fire daimyo instantly. Forget the damn stick. I'll write a bloody law. Get too close to Naruto and you'll lose your head, and he didn't mean the one on your shoulders either. He mentally gave his best evil cackle. Oh yes, just try to get close to his child. Wait. My child. When did it become so easy to think that? He thought to himself. In the end though, he found he simply didn't care. If it was already so natural to think of this adorable child as his own, then it was a sign, a very good sign. Kami must have set this up. Then the daimyo smiled and gently knelt down in front of Naruto. Naruto, he coaxed gently, then asked, do you trust your Kurane? Yes, your highness, Naruto replied softly. He then continued, growing more confident with every word. She's my first friend. She gave me my very first hug, and I know I only met her last night, but I know that she cares for me too. She's my big sister, and that's that. He finished dramatically with a beaming smile on his face that warmed the cold morning air. His eyes flickered with emotion, and the slight tremble of his body seemed to melt away with the morning air. Naruto would have liked to have thought that that was his first manly man moment, but to everyone else, kawaii! Screamed the women, all self-control gone with the cold in the room. They all pounced upon the confused child, and despite his still filthy appearance, they hugged the boy to themselves. Even the daimyo, this time, had to at least make sure this feminine boy was indeed real. So he gently plopped his hand down and petted his head. Wow, despite being absolutely dirty, it's so soft. He thought absently. Naruto. I will give Kurama-san the benefit of the doubt right now, but we must have answers later, alright? The daimyo stated firmly. Naruto, beaming with his ever-beautiful smile, was beginning to purr once more, and while not used to this much attention, thought to himself, could this day get any better? Kurane? When all he got was silence, he just assumed she was sleeping. Even Bijou had to sleep, right? Kurama meanwhile was in fact asleep, or rather unconscious, surrounded by a puddle of blood. If one heard her last thoughts, they would have heard, Yufufufu. So adorable, Yufufufu. After enjoying the moment shared by the unofficial family, Madame Shinji stood to her full height and spoke. Naru-chan? Child, my name is Kaira Shinji, but if you let me, I'd very much like to be your new mother. Naruto froze. Was this real? Please don't be a daydream. He whispered with a stutter. Ah, really? He spoke just a little bit clearer, but you could hear the desperation in his voice. It was then that Yuki came forward and grasped his dainty hands within her delicate ones. She didn't say anything. She just smiled tenderly and simply nodded. Naruto trembled. His emotions were running on a high, and he squeaked suddenly when the daimyo gently laid a hand on his head once more. Naruto followed the man's arm and eventually reached the man's face. It was there that Naruto looked into the man's eyes as if searching for an answer, and when he seemed to find it, he smiled a small soft smile. Hi. I'd love to be a part of this family, was all he said before the women squealed and hugged him once more. The daimyo simply smiled to himself and nodded once, a simple gesture, but to Naruto, who never had a male role model? It was a moment to remember. He woke up that morning to nothing but a friendly cat, but now he had a family. Very well then, Naruto. My name is Fire Daimyo Masahiko Shinji. Most don't know that, so they usually call me my lord, the daimyo told him quietly, but you, Naruto, may call me father or anything of that sort. And my full name is Yuki Kagai Shinji, and second wife to His Highness, Yuki introduced with a smile. You could also call me mother. Just remember to call Kaoru and I different titles. Any Naru-chan? Naruto, still in shock, nodded quietly and looked to the various people. No. My family? His mind proudly corrected, and his smile bloomed into the most beautiful smile of his life, a smile that had his family sucking in a collective breath, and then the hug held that little bit longer, and wait, was Tora trying to groom him again? He sighed to himself but didn't try to stop the affectionate cat. After all, she was the guide that led him to his new family, so instead he snuggled further into the family hug. In his mind we find Kurama, wiping her tears and smiling faintly to herself. I hope you're up there, Minato, you too, Kushina. If you could see what a simple act of love has done. I know that his power will keep burning bright. I can already feel the seal being reinforced. She smiled sadly in the darkness when something miraculous happened. That singular spot of sun that was created by Naruto upon their first meeting suddenly grew and lit up the darkness further. As her eyes readjusted themselves, she noticed something carved into the side of the room. She gasped, then snarled in anger, and then, when calming down, smirked. Most interesting indeed. I thought I felt something off about his body. You foolish mortals, it may take me time to repair this setback, but you've dabbled in something that is beyond your comprehension or control. All I need is a potent source of blood and wait for his chakra to stabilize so I can do the rest. And with that she reverted back to her original form and curled into her now warm cage. As her eyes drifted close, she let out a singular word: soon. Oh, by the way, Naruto pouted as if finally remembering an important piece of information. I'm a boy. What? Cried Yuki and Kaoru in perfect sync, whilst Masahiko just laughed heartedly. Things were going to be entertaining from now on. Fire Daimyo Masahiko Shinji was seated on his throne, and he was certainly not pleased. While not livid anymore, it was still there simmering away underneath his skin. That was not the reason for his displeasure though. You see, once their little Naru-chan accepted their offer to join their family, something that he never forget occurred. Flashback. I'm happy you want to join our family, Naru-chan, Yuki exclaimed cheerfully. Now let's get you cleaned up. A nice hot bath and some clean clothes are in order for you. Naruto tilted his head slightly and peered curiously at his new mother. He got a nervous look after a moment, however, and took a step back slowly. What's nice about a bath? The matron bathes me, but only during winter though. She uses the garden hose at full power and bathes me that way. He whispered it, but they heard him as clearly as if he'd shouted it out. She always dragged me back to my room after that. It was very cold that night. Swallowing her sheer fury at his response, Yuki replied, that wasn't a bath, Naru-chan. How about I go with you? We could bathe together and I'll show you how to do it yourself for when you want to take a bath next time, okay? Naruto was apprehensive for a moment before he nodded shyly, and Yuki gently took his hand and led him further into the mansion, pointing out the shiny things that caught Naruto's eye along the way. Flashback. And Fire Daimyo Shinji was so angry that he'd excused himself moments after they'd left. Kaoru deciding to organize some clothing for Naruto, and so here he was, brooding and stewing in his thoughts. I must be careful. There's no telling how soon Hiruzen will notice Naruto's disappearance. He muttered to himself. Then there's the issue of his obvious state of health. and of course his personal safety. He pondered this for quite some time when he suddenly thought of something. His guardians, or what was left of them anyway. They held the answer. It was time to test the loyalty of his remaining guardians. Bring me Asuma, Sarutobi, and Chirika at once. He shouted to the seemingly empty room, and seconds later, a shadow dropped to the ground in a low bow and disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Moments later 2 men entered the throne room of the Daimyo. They quickly made their way to his throne and taking a knee, bowed to him. I'm not going to bother describing them as you know what they look like and how they dress. If not, please Google them with Google Images. My lord, they intoned in perfect sync. How may we serve you? The Daimyo was pleased at their swift response to his summons. Though they were the ones responsible for stopping the coup, he could only abide by complete obedience. He motioned for them to rise before he took on a stern look. I have summoned you both for 2 reasons. The Daimyo spoke with a strong voice, a voice that made you stop and listen carefully. Firstly, in regards to our talks about the disbandment of the Guardians of the Ninja 12, I do hereby decline your request. I'm truly sorry, my friends, but recent events do not sit well with me and I'll need you both in the capital. My family will be moving back there within the month and I suspect there might be problems, particularly from Konoha. Both ninja tensed. When the Daimyo had such a feeling and told them of said feeling, it usually meant trouble. Chirika responded first. My lord, surely there must be another way to protect you and still disband the Guardians. There's only Asuma and I now remaining anyway. Perhaps the ANBU force? No, Konoha is to whom I suspect there will be trouble from. The Daimyo spoke sharply, though he pondered Chirika's answer deeply before glancing towards Asuma. And your answer, Asuma? He questioned. Honestly? My time here has been both good and bad. I admit that while I miss Konoha deeply, I could not in good conscience leave you and your family unprotected. I am loyal to you first and Konoha second, my lord. Asuma responded confidently, and with conviction. Chirika's face softened and a smile appeared. Masahiko stared both men down whilst Asuma was speaking, and by the time Asuma had finished his declaration a smile had appeared on Masahiko's face. A very good answer, Asuma. That's exactly what I wanted you to hear. For the Guardians are loyal and serve me and the ANB report to the Hokage. He responded thoughtfully. Asuma and Chirika both raised a brow at the Daimyo but didn't comment, as they were starting to get the feeling that there was more to this conversation than their lord was telling them, and while they understood his concerns they soon began to ponder what the Fire Daimyo was considering, especially in regards to Konoha or their futures as Guardians. I wish for you to begin looking for replacements for the positions of the Guardians at once. Masahiko ordered with authority. Chirika, you shall begin this task with haste, but Asuma, stay for a moment. Chirika bowed and disappeared swiftly to begin his task while Asuma obeyed the command and stayed. All the while Asuma couldn't help but feel nervous. Was there something wrong? After a tense few minutes the Daimyo let out a sigh and clasped his hands together. He eyed Asuma intently, and could see the man sweating. An impressive declaration, Asuma, but I need to know right here and now. Masahiko spoke firmly, and with a deeper edge he continued, where does your loyalty lie? To your Daimyo? Your clan? A second of silence, your Hokage? Answer me now, Asuma Sarutobi. On your very honor, answer me correctly. He boomed the last bit, and it echoed through the room. Asuma swallowed hard before he took in a much-needed deep breath. Why was the Fire Daimyo questioning his loyalty now, especially after everything they'd been through? Asuma opened his mouth to respond but found himself closing it a second later. My father never really cared for me, only his position as Hokage, and Konoha certainly didn't feel like a home to me apart from Kurenai. There's nothing to tempt me back to that filthy hellhole of a village. I serve you, my lord, and I swore my loyalty and honor only to you, my lord Daimyo. Masahiko's stare drilled into Asuma's eyes, searching for something Asuma wasn't quite sure of, but after what felt like a lifetime, the Daimyo spoke once more. Good, Asuma. Very good. Your loyalty has been tested and you've proven yourself, so I have a new assignment for you. Whilst Chirika guards me and searches for recruits, you are to guard my new son. The seriousness never left the Daimyo's face, and Asuma just knew that this was something he couldn't screw up. Wait a moment, son. Yuki wasn't pregnant, was she? Forgive me, but I don't understand, my lord. I wasn't aware that you had a son. Asuma spoke his words carefully as he was still on edge after the previous conversation. Masahiko found himself smiling softly in reflection of his new child, and Asuma found himself gawking. The Fire Daimyo had never smiled so freely in such a manner to anyone, that was unless he wasn't in the company of either of his wives. Yes, Asuma. My wives and I have adopted a small child, and at the moment his identity is to remain a secret from even your father, the Hokage. Do I make myself clear? The Daimyo stated firmly with a look that radiated authority. Of course, my lord. Asuma gulped his reply. Good, my new son is currently being bathed, but you will be introduced soon enough. But my questions of your loyalty comes down to this moment. There was a steely edge to his voice. My new son's name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. He is the son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. The statement echoed through the room, and Asuma couldn't stop his loud gasp. But my lord, isn't he Konoha's Jinchuriki? His question was met with a stern gaze and a threatening tone. Be careful of what you say next, Asuma. Asuma shivered. That look was the same look that he possessed when he had the other guardians executed without mercy for their treason and attempted coup d'état. I have no problems with the child, so even if you hadn't adopted him I would aid him if he were in danger. I swear it on my oath and loyalty to you. Asuma replied honestly. Very well, he will be here soon. Do not be shocked by his appearance, the Fire Daimyo told him, mirth swimming in his eyes, and Asuma found himself raising an eyebrow. What could be so funny about his appearance? Was he deformed? Soon after leaving the outer tea room, Yuki along with Naruto and Kaoru headed down the warmly colored hallway towards the bathroom. The walls in the hallway were a simple but soothing pale blue color, and along with the smoothly polished wooden floor, it gave off the feeling of floating in a sky of blue. Naruto was rather enamored by the simplistic decorations, and the young boy constantly shifted his attention to various decorations and paintings in an attempt to memorize everything that he could in case it was a dream. It had both Yuki and Kaoru frowning sadly. Yuki, I shall go and find some clean clothing for Naruto. Madam Shinji finally spoke, breaking the otherwise silent journey. If you could please bathe him. I shall return soon. Yuki nodded and turned to the curious but slightly fearful gaze of Naruto. You have nothing to fear, Naruto. Yuki spoke calmingly to him. I'll be there with you and show you how to bathe correctly, okay? Naruto's gaze turned cautious, but he still nodded his head in acceptance. Again, Yuki smiled tenderly at Naruto, and he found himself smiling shyly back. He really liked Yuki's smile. It made him feel warm and loved. Yuki and Naruto turned around a corner, and Yuki gently led him into the closest room on his right. Naruto scrunched his eyes shut as the moment the two entered. Warm steam hit his face. Not used to the warmth of the steam, Naruto flinched briefly and quickly latched onto Yuki's kimono. Yuki noticed and her eyes began to mist over. It was being made abundantly clear that her new son had never had a real bath before, and if his reaction to steam was this bad, then he must have suffered hot steam constantly in a negative way. Had he been made to clean hot pots and pans or something similar? The moment Naruto latched onto her kimono, Yuki smiled soothingly at the scared boy. Nothing will hurt you, Naruto. I'm here and I'm perfectly safe. So long as I'm with you, nothing and no one will hurt you, okay? Naruto instantly calmed his breathing as Yuki gently brushed her hand soothingly through his hair. She explained that he needed to remove his clothes and then follow her inside. Naruto did so, but only after convincing Yuki to do the same. They both entered the bathhouse and she introduced him to the various products, such as shampoo, conditioner, lotion and soap. Naruto took several minutes committing the newly acquired knowledge to memory before allowing Yuki to wash his hair. My Naruto, you have beautiful hair, but you need to take care of it, so watch carefully as I wash your hair so that you can do it yourself in the future. Yuki spoke calmly to not startle the already tense child further. She remained patient before getting an idea. Yuki began to hum quietly to soothe him, and after 10 minutes he started to relax completely. Yuki spent a little longer teaching Naruto how to wash his body and then the importance of using the lotion afterwards so that his skin didn't dry out after they left the bath. After properly washing Naruto and teaching him to do so in the process, Yuki ushered Naruto to a giant tub of relaxingly hot water. Naruto was content to stay there silently next to his new mother, and was infinitely pleased to feel her soft hands brush soothingly through his hair. After about 10 minutes Yuki stood and instructed Naruto to follow. So Naruto did as they headed towards the bathhouse's exit. Naruto left the bathhouse feeling more relaxed than ever before, and unbeknownst to him, he had begun to hum the very same tune that Yuki had hummed to relax him. Walking back into the change room, he found his clothes gone but replaced in soft, pretty clothes like Yuki was wearing before their bath. Yuki explained how to dress in the kimono as she dressed both herself and Naruto before sitting down and petting the bench beside her. Naruto understood her gesture and sat on the bench waiting for further instructions. Yuki felt anger bubbling inside of her. The swift and prompt obedience that he displayed was something that had to have been trained, and she had the feeling that it may have even been beaten into him. Sighing sadly, she took a nearby hairbrush and explained what it was in haste as she saw a flash of fear pass over his features. Did he think that he'd be punished for something? Nevertheless, she calmed his fears by showing him how to brush his hair. What she didn't expect was for Naruto to begin purring rather loudly, and the fact that he hadn't noticed meant that he wasn't aware that he was doing so, but she internally squealed at the adorable child. She unconsciously found herself braiding some of his hair before she caught herself, and she apologized sheepishly for doing so, but Naruto merely shrugged and embarrassingly murmured that he didn't mind. They both left soon after, and she gently took his much smaller and daintier hand in her own and escorted him to the Fire Daimyo's Konoha throne room. She knocked on the giant doors that had instantly captured the attention of the curious child with her, and after waiting an appropriate length of time she entered the throne room with Naruto following meekly after her. She spotted Asuma and briefly tensed before a mischievous look took its place on her face as Asuma's complete attention was on the adorable child following after her seconds. Later she heard Naruto squeak quietly and hide poorly behind her legs. Oh, how she wanted to squeal and hug him. Yuki somehow quelled her inner desire to smother the child and was happy to see Naruto come out of his shyness by smiling and waving nervously at the guardian ninja. Do you think that you can say hello to the man and your father? Yuki quietly whispered as she bent down to Naruto's ear. Masahiko would really like it if you do, and it's also good manners, Naruto. Naruto perked up and spoke as clearly as he could while bowing respectively. It's nice to meet you, sir. Fire Daimyo Masahiko, Shinji and Asuma Sarutobi were brought out of their thoughts by a knock at the giant doors to the throne room. Asuma turned and saw Yuki escorting a young child into the room, and Asuma actually swallowed. What an adorable child. Give that girl 10 years or so and people from far and wide would willingly go to war to win her hand. The Fire Daimyo and Yuki had instantly both noticed the awestruck look on Asuma's face, and they chuckled silently. Upon noticing the other presence in the room, Naruto quickly hid behind Yuki's leg and Yuki soon found herself suddenly sporting a rather mischievous smile. The Fire Daimyo, however, felt a sudden surge of protectiveness surge through him and unknown to either himself or Asuma, he glared heatedly at him. Naruto curiously peeked out from behind Yuki's leg and observed the man in front of him before he smiled shyly at him and waved timidly. Asuma stared at the adorable creature hiding behind Lady Yuki's leg, though the little lady wasn't doing a good job of hiding. The child appeared to be petite and delicate. She wore a simple soft white kimono/yukata that had a bamboo and a crane print on the leg area, close to the feet, and her feet were covered in simple white tabi socks, and he assumed that she'd wear Geta sandals with them if going out into the gardens or outside into the village. Her but-length blonde hair looked soft to the touch and fell in silky, smooth tresses aside from the simple single braid on the right side of her head. Her face, though, is what caused him to choke on his breath. Breathtakingly beautiful ocean blue eyes stared curiously at him. They were framed by long delicate eyelashes topped with her soft, gentle blonde eyebrows. She had a pale, yet creamy complexion, and if you squinted you could make out very faint marks on her cheeks that looked like whiskers. When the adorable child shyly smiled and waved timidly at him, it took all his training and fortitude to resist the urge to go and pet her head. The daimyo had noticed the changes as well and swallowed deeply. That law sounds terribly appropriate now, and are those whiskers? Yuki whispered something in Naruto's ear and he perked up with a delighted smile on his face. It's nice to meet you, sir. He bowed with a grace that very few could achieve, and Asuma was once again spellbound. Naruto then gathered his courage and approached the Fire Daimyo as well as his new father. Nice to see you again, Tichu-chan. He gently whispered as if guarding a precious secret. It was a lovely voice, Asuma mused to himself, soft and delicate like chiming bells. The daimyo froze and his mind snapped. He swooped down and hugged Naruto, lifting him up and onto his lap. Naruto squeaked loudly, once again not helping his image, but once settled on his father's lap he found it quite comfortable indeed. Naruto smiled his usual dazzling smile, and in a rare fit of childish courage, hugged his new father back. Yes. The daimyo yelled internally, progress coughing to clear his throat. He decided to introduce them to each other. Asuma? This is my new son Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Naru-chan? This is Asuma Sarutobi, your new but temporary bodyguard. Asuma gawked, Naruto tilted his head cutely in thought, and Yuki giggled. Sarutobi? As in the same clan as the Hokage? Does that mean you are a shinobi, a ninja? Naruto questioned softly, head still tilted cutely. That snapped Asuma out of his thoughts, and he coughed to cover his gawking. Yes. Same clan. He's my father. He said the last bit bitterly. Not that Naruto noticed, and I am a ninja. I protect your father and family from harm, and that means that I protect you too now. I guess he shrugged. Here it comes, he thought bitterly. Questions about my old man. That's amazing. Naruto exclaimed happily, eyes sparkling with that stunning smile of his back. You must be incredibly strong. Nah? Could you teach me? Asuma blinked once, then twice before chuckling out loud. Maybe when you're a little taller, kid. Naruto pouted with a huff, puffing his cheeks out. I'm not that small. Yuki was twitching constantly, so adorable she mentally squealed. Asuma twitched once more, must resist the urge to pet. Meanwhile the daimyo didn't care for once. Because Naruto's all mine for now. Yufufufu. He chuckled evilly in his mind. Outside, however, he just petted Naruto's hair. Naruto was completely oblivious to all this, but he did like his hair being petted if the utterly blissful look was of any indication. I love my new family, he whispered as he slowly dozed off. Masahiko just smiled fondly and passed Naruto to Yuki, whispering to take him to a room. It had been almost a week since Naruto had met Asuma and later, Chiriku. After a brief but detailed report about Naruto's habits, Asuma had gone into the garden with Naruto to speak a little more in bond, mostly about shinobi. Asuma was already impressed with the keen intellect that Naruto displayed, despite his timidness, and as such, he was preparing to teach Naruto shogi, as Naruto had expressed an interest to learn more about the game after he spent half an hour watching a game between Chiriku and Asuma, and by watching he meant predicting a winning strategy that helped Asuma finally beat Chiriku. Masahiko Shinji was deep in thought once more. He knew that he needed to be very careful and to play his cards close to his chest. He considered every option available, and decided to simply send a messenger to Konoha to inform Hiruzen of his intention to move to the capital for political reasons. Hiruzen wouldn't suspect his motives, as he'd done this many times before, the last being a month before the Kyuubi attack 3 to 4 years prior, and according to Naruto, Hiruzen had never took the time to meet him and never visited the orphanage personally, so that meant that he had no idea of what Naruto currently looked like, and that was definitely an advantage. He was brought out of his thoughts when he felt an incredibly powerful shockwave pass through the castle grounds. It caused an incredible force of wind to blow open his locked window like it wasn't there. It scattered all of his paperwork across the room along with the large shards of splintered wood and shattered glass. He was instantly on guard and jumped to his feet immediately. He rushed to the window fearing the worst, as Naruto and Asuma were out there, but what he saw would impact him for the rest of his life. Asuma was standing there in shock with his mouth gaping as he stared at Naruto. Naruto stood a little further into the garden under the shade provided by the great wall that surrounded his castle, with brilliant blue chakra swirling around him. He noticed, of course, that the chakra was much brighter and clearer than normal chakra with a similar appearance to his wonderfully expressive blue eyes. He was suddenly rather glad that Mito Uzumaki Senju herself had engraved sensor protection seals on said great walls and all around his castle, as it meant that whatever this chakra was, it wouldn't be detected outside his castle's grounds by Konoha ninja. It swirled violently around Naruto like a natural storm and caused a reaction with the very elements around him. The earth surrounding the swirling chakra was being pushed away from Naruto, not cracking like the effects that ordinary chakra caused, but being bent? Yes, that is an appropriate term. The earth was being bent, and flowed smoothly away from the vortex of chakra surrounding the child. It was the water he noticed next. It was swaying to an imaginary rhythm being made by his chakra. He watched the water being absorbed by Naruto's chakra before gracefully continuing its journey around his body. Again Masahiko found himself watching in awe as it bent to Naruto's will. There was no point in trying to explain the massive storm of wind that it picked up as a result, as he'd felt it earlier when his paperwork and window were both literally blown to pieces. Naruto let out a monstrous roar to the heavens, and it was then Masahiko witnessed the fire. A cataclysmic force of blue-colored fire shot out of Naruto's mouth and into the sky. It was simply breathtaking. The blue flames were so hot that it felt like the very temperature around him had increased tenfold. The fire daimyo quickly ducked under a branch from the once beautiful cherry blossom tree that had been ripped off and ran up to Asuma, though all that Asuma continued to do was to stare at the child. His eyes were glued to the storm that had engulfed the feminine child. It was an incredibly beautiful sight. Naruto's blonde hair was flying in every direction as his potent chakra and the wind that said chakra had summoned swirled around him. The cherry blossoms that were currently in season were flying in a mesmerizing show of color and surrounded him. It created an image that would forever be etched into his mind. Beautiful, Asuma whispered to himself. It was then he saw the daimyo duck under a branch and rushed to his side. What the hell is happening, Asuma? The daimyo shouted, though he was barely heard over the howling wind. Naruto asked me how he could unlock his chakra and I told him how. I wasn't expecting this, I swear. Asuma exclaimed. He's actually accessed his chakra on his first try. It's a first for me too, as the only other person to do this from his generation is a child from the Uchiha clan, who goes by the name of Itachi Uchiha. It was all going smoothly until he tried to push his chakra outwards like I instructed. Asuma was nervous. Naruto already had this much chakra? It certainly wasn't the fox's chakra as he'd felt its maliciousness the day it attacked Konoha. This was something else. His chakra was so dense and potent, and it was bending the environment around him. It was something that he'd never seen before, and it caused sweat to form on his brow. Wait a moment, Jinchuriki are given the power of something by their bijou, right? Look at the current Mizukage, Yagura. He has a godlike amount of control over water. If the Kyuubi was able to topple mountains and create tsunamis with its tails, then that ability to manipulate the elements must have transferred to Naruto. The daimyo explained. It's the only explanation that makes sense. Asuma pondered the theory provided by his lord. Yes, that could explain it, but Kushina never displayed this level of power over the elements, and the fact that Naruto did worried the man. That scared him more than he'd ever admit, because if Naruto possessed even the slightest inclination to Minato's level of genius and ruthlessness on the battlefield, then the world would be in for a great force of change, and anyone that incurred the wrath of this child was in for a crude awakening. Both the fire daimyo and Asuma watched as the chakra finally slowed before it eventually dissipated completely, and they both gasped at the mesmerizing scene before them. As the winds died down and the fire stopped ascending into the sky, the scene was one of something you'd read about in a fantasy story. As Naruto stood there, the very visage of a being at peace with himself. There was a gentle smile gracing his lips as the cherry blossoms surrounding him gently floated to the ground. It was almost ethereal, godly, like something that should never be seen by mortals. Masahiko and Asuma both stifled a gasp as Naruto opened his eyes. They were glowing while he still wore his soft smile, glancing at Asuma and his father with a serene expression. Nah? Asuma-san, how was that? Naruto exclaimed happily. Was that okay? That felt amazing, like a piece of me was pulled out and to the surface. Chakra is awesome. I'm going to be a super cool ninja now. Asuma opened his mouth to respond but closed it again seconds later. He continued to follow this routine for several minutes, and Naruto instinctively picked up on Asuma's nervousness. Nah? Asuma-san, did I do something wrong? Naruto had dropped his excitement after seeing the looks from both Asuma and his father. Did I do a bad thing? He asked softly, stage 1 of release complete. He heard from his mind. Ah. Kurane? Why are they staring at me like that? Naruto muttered quietly. Did I make a mistake? He heard what sounded like a sigh from his big sister before he got a reply. Absolutely not, Naruto-chan. You've merely experienced the effects of my chakra breaking one of the seals hindering you, but as my willing host you also receive the ability to control the elements, not with chakra but the actual elements themselves. You'll need to learn how to control this power, as like water, it can be soft and calm one moment, but it can also cause great destruction the next. Kurama explained softly, as if speaking any louder would upset and scare her. Naruto-chan, I will add this to your lessons. If your new mothers teach you etiquette, I will be able to teach you more. Furthermore, if this Asuma Sarutobi can teach you the ninja arts, it would give me more time to instruct you in the ways of bending. Bending? Seals? Naruto thought out loud, unknowingly snapping both men out of their stupor. What do you mean by bending, Naruto, and why did you just mention seals? Masahiko stared Naruto in the eye, all but demanding the truth from him. Well, Kurane said that what I did is called bending, and it's her gift for being her host. Naruto stuttered out promptly. She also mentioned something about seals that are hinda. Ring, no, that's not it. Hindering? Asuma finished, his eyes narrow. I wouldn't put it past the council to do something like that. Who's Kurane, eh? Kurane is the QB, Asuma-san. Naruto replied as if he were commenting on the weather. Ugh. Kurama facepalmed. I need to remind him not to say that without thinking first. They'd think he was being controlled or influenced or something. That was what Asuma was indeed thinking. He glanced at the daimyo with a questioning gaze. Masahiko thought about what was said to him and looked back to Asuma with an I'll explain later look. Asuma nodded slightly and waited for the daimyo to further think. This proves to be a problem, Asuma. Change your plans. We will be leaving for the capital at once. We can hire a ninja team to seal any extra clothing or required items here later. We must leave at once. Masahiko ordered swiftly, though he was brought out of his planning to the quiet voice of his new son. Leave Konoha? But this is my home. He spoke softly. Naruto, he heard his Kurane reason. This place is where you were born, yes. But in order to become a fine shinobi and protect yourself and your new family, you must leave Konoha behind. You can return once you are ready. Whilst having his Kurane explain this, both Masahiko and Asuma shared another look, and when they noticed Naruto return to reality, he whispered a simple I understand, Tuchan. Just please promise me that I can be trained as a ninja. I will protect my family and I will protect this land. They were both stunned as they saw the raw determination that had entered his eyes. It was a fire that they didn't expect from the usually demure child, and it was made stronger as his eyes glowed with power. This is the true will of fire. Asuma thought with an internal smirk. He has spirit just like Kushina-sama. Am I seeing who Naruto truly is at last? The daimyo thought to himself, if this is a mere snippet of his show of power and confidence, then I will have that sharpened and polished. Naruto will shake the very earth when I'm through with him. Think very carefully about this, Naruto. The daimyo spoke sternly with an air of authority. If you choose the path of a shinobi, then I will have you work to the ground. If you give up and refuse to continue, then I will see to it that you never become a shinobi ever again. So Naruto, my son, answer me right now. Will you protect Hi-no Kuni as a member of my forces? He bellowed the last bit with a voice of power, the voice of the ruler of Hi-no Kuni, one that inspired loyalty. That fire that burned within Naruto dimmed for a few seconds as he second-guessed his resolve. I believe in you, Naruto. He heard from his big sister, I believe in you, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Protect the people and prove them wrong. That simple statement, just the very act of having someone precious to him declare that they believed in him, caused the fire in his eyes to burn stronger than anything that Asuma and the daimyo had ever seen before. Naruto's eyes glowed with an ethereal power once more. It was a power that was beyond the grasp of mere mortals, and it caused both Asuma and Masahiko to shiver internally. I declare to you now, Asuma-san, father, I will never back down. I will never quit. I will never go back on my word, and I will, with all that is in me, all of my power, and even if it costs me my very life, I will protect the future of Hi-no Kuni and prove to its people that I am Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. This is now my ninja way. Naruto declared this in a clear voice that radiated the power that was present in him, causing, if possible, his eyes to glow even brighter. Asuma and Masahiko were stunned by the maturity in Naruto's voice, not to mention the vocabulary he was displaying. Was this really the shy little boy that they knew? Very well then, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, I hereby declare you a ninja in training. You will train with Asuma, Chiriku and anyone else I deem fit until such a time as deem you fit for service, and then you can prove Konoha wrong, declared the daimyo with equal power in his voice. This child, my child, will go far. He reminds me of his parents. I did marry them after all. Asuma? Gather my wives and Chiriku, for we make for the capital at once. Furthermore, once we arrive, I'll have either you or Chiriku begin searching for two people that need to answer a few questions of mine, and above all else, remember to keep this secret from anyone in the village. The daimyo ordered to his friend. We still need to find out about those seals as well. With a smirk as he pulled out a cigarette, he finally spoke, as you command, my lord. I can't wait to hear about the chaos once my old man finds out that he can't find his precious Jinchuriki after all. He hasn't even visited the kid, and even though I know next to nothing about seals, I know that Jinchurikis need love for their seals to function properly. If anything, this'll prove to be very entertaining. The kid's not too bad after all. With that thought, he lit his cigarette as he left the garden. The kid is going to be something after some training. He's only 3, almost 4, and if he commands that much power now, what will happen when his chakra coils and reserves settle and mature? That is a frightening thought. The declaration that they'd be leaving immediately was instantly shot down by his wife, Kaoru, who had reminded her husband that Naruto was still adjusting to the pace around their castle and that he still jumped around people who he hadn't met before, and that led them to realize that they needed to take a deep breath and think this through. Consequently, that was the wisest move, as Asuma had realized that it would be best to plan their journey for any and all eventualities. After they'd agreed, they realized that the most direct way for safety and speed's sake to the Imperial City was to leave Konoha and head west, then cross at Konoha's western outpost, and make the straight length up the Imperial High Road to the city. It was a sound plan and shaved off about several weeks off of the scenic route that the Fire Daimyo and his family usually took, not to mention that it'd give credence to the daimyo's message of arriving for the capital for important business. The Sandaime Hokage may suggest the same route, and if he did then he'd send a team to supervise the crossing. The only problem: how were they planning to hide Naruto? The western outpost was regularly used, and as such the many border troops dispatched were frequently rotated at random to prevent the possibility of bribery and other inappropriate or illegal activities, and since they were randomized there was the off chance that one of the ninja or kunoichi would recognize the adorable blonde in their company. The Fire Daimyo instantly suggested using a henge to fool the ninja or kunoichi there, but Asuma quickly replied that it'd be impossible to use a henge on Naruto to fool them, as not only was there the chance that a Hyuga clan member might be there, but they also had sensors as a precaution. Chiriku also added that the 4 outposts of Konoha, each labeled for their directions, north, south, east, and west, all possessed Uzumaki seals that not only added barrier protections but made the use of henges and their advanced variant henge seals completely useless. Then the fact that they were designed by Mito Uzumaki, and then maintained by Kushina Uzumaki and even the Yandaime Hokage, they were likely to be impenetrable. They were deep in thought, pushing ideas back and forth for hours before it was Masahiko's wife, Kaoru, that provided the answer that they needed. Her genius idea was to disguise Naruto the old-fashioned way, using cosmetics and clothing. The guards would be on the lookout for a blonde-haired boy, so they'd dye Naruto's hair and dress him as a girl. Then they'd use makeup to cover his faint whisker-like marks and give him the appearance of a nobleman's daughter. The added brilliance of Kaoru's plan was that if the various ninja and kunoichi did notice the makeup, then it wouldn't be suspicious, because nobility often taught their children these things young so as to entice offers of marriage by other noble houses or families. While this wasn't their intention for Naruto, it would be the perfect disguise. It hadn't taken long to find Naruto, who was spending time with Yuki in the garden. Yuki had taken great pleasure in teaching Naruto the little things that he hadn't been taught. Simple things that had Yuki feeling even more depressed as time went on for the little boy that had effortlessly made his way into her heart. They were small things like what colors were called or names of flowers. Just meaninglessly little things, but Yuki had been patient in describing names and other such facts to the awestruck child. Though his ability to retain and recall that information and his ability to comprehend her more detailed explanations was simple, remarkable, and even a little scary, considering that Naruto was only 4 years old. Kaoru relieved and exhausted but happy Yuki after revealing their plan for getting safely across the western outpost, and Yuki was more than happy to oversee the selection of clothing for Naruto. Kaoru nodded and informed her of the colors that she was going to use with Naruto so that Yuki wouldn't waste her time. The poor Kagaya had been constantly tired as she didn't want to leave their Naruchan alone. Kaoru watched Yuki leave and then turned to the ever-curious Naruto, who'd instantly noticed the departure of his white-haired mother. He tilted his head in question to Kaoru, and after a tight hug and squeal from her, she led him to a room that held all manner of bright and colorful items. Bottled items that gave off various smells, be they horrible or heavenly, littered the shelves with a large bathtub in the center of the room. Now Naruchan, Kaoru gently spoke as to draw the attention of Naruto's wandering gaze. To get to our new home without anyone finding you and taking you away from us, we need to disguise you. Disguise me? Naruto replied questioningly. Yes, little one, Kaoru responded with a giggle. Sometimes Naruto was just too adorable. It means we change how you look so others won't recognize you. Oh, he replied thoughtfully, that means that I become someone else, right? Kaoru beamed at Naruto. Very good, Naruchan, and yes, you get to pretend that you're someone else. Naruto's eyes suddenly took on a mischievous gleam that had Kurama sighing in pride. What do I need to do, Ka-chan? Well, Kaoru trailed off as she explained the various uses for the products, and how to match colors and scents for different occasions, how the different scents had meanings, and how colors also had meaning in certain events, such as weddings, funerals, and formal occasions. Naruto absorbed all the information she was feeding him with ease. He was enraptured by his mother's knowledge, and when he asked her how she knew so much, she smiled and gave him a little of her family's history. Kaoru was born into a noble family that made perfumes, fragrances, and beauty products. She was betrothed to Masahiko at an early age. At first they got off to a rocky start, as he was a warrior-type leader and she, a pacifist type at heart. Unless you got her angry, that is. She explained that they truly fell in love when he stopped her uncle from slapping her by taking the blow, and then instead of harming the man, he let her uncle leave without punishment. Her uncle had just lost his wife and child in childbirth and hadn't been thinking straight. It wasn't an excuse for his actions, but Masahiko could have had his head for even glaring at him if he wanted. It was then that she realized that Masahiko, despite having no problems with war or fighting, was able to be a good man as well as a good leader, and the rest was history. Naruto was awestruck by the man that was now his father. He could have retaliated, but he didn't. He gave a second chance, but only the one if her later stories were accurate. Naruto vowed to be a good man, just at all times, but unmerciful to those that had no chance of redemption. He learned from his Kurane that he'd inherit her ability to see the intention of others by their emotions, and it would enable him to know the hearts of those he met. Whilst Naruto was deep in thought on his impromptu lesson, Kaoru was debating what colors to use. It would be best to use colors that were less likely to draw attention, so it had to be colors from the 3 new parents. Black would be best as it was a common hair color in the land of fire, but everyone knew that she was barren and unable to give birth, and since Yuki was the only other wife/concubine, then her hair color as a Kaguya would overwrite the common black-haired trait, and then her pure amethyst-colored eyes were closer to Naru's blue, glancing at Naruto's blonde hair, and his skin tone was enough to convince her Yuki's coloring it was. So Naruto spent the morning with Kaoru being educated on how he was going to look and how he needed to act like a young lady. His mother spent extra time in educating him on how to behave, his mannerisms, and any other things that he needed to know in order to pull off their escape plan. After they'd gone over everything a final time, Yuki had come back looking much better rested, and then all three spent some mother-son time. They helped bathe Naruto properly and then dress in some basic robes so they didn't mess up the good clothes. They then began his transformation. They started with the hair and eyebrows. Yuki was a godsend for Kaoru as Naruto was very nervous and twitchy around the chemicals due to his heightened senses, and having the white-haired woman there kept their Naru-chan calm. Once the dye had worked and Naruto's eyebrows and hair were done, they took a step back and observed their handiwork. Naruto looked like a blue-eyed Yuki. It was amazing to look at and even more adorable after Naruto himself realized that very same thing as he bounced happily on his feet and hugged the two while babbling on how he and Yuki Kawa-chan looked like each other. Properly dressing was next, and since they'd gone with Yuki's coloring as a guide to Naruto and his new appearance, they settled on blues and softer colors. Yuki and Kaoru had selected a simple but exquisite pale blue-colored kimono that had a beautiful snowflake pattern on it with a tasteful embroidered crane to give the illusion of the crane being hidden in the snow, and all of this was completed with a darker blue obi that perfectly set the scene of snowfall. Kaoru and Yuki had lost it at this point due to the sheer cuteness of the scene as Naruto had spun in every which way to get a better view at the luxurious and warm kimono. He'd never worn many styles of clothing before, and even though he was a boy, the comfort of these clothes, despite being girls' clothing, made him feel safe and warm, and they were pretty. The makeup was simply some foundation and lip gloss with a little brush of powder to make him even more adorable. Next went a special Uzumaki seal that Chiriku knew it was a suppression seal that would shield his chakra network and give her the appearance of being a civilian. It was only something that even the Byakugan and Sharingan couldn't see, and they placed that on his back just below his shoulder. Masahiko, Asuma and Chiriku all stared at Naruto when the two women returned with a white-haired girl instead of a blonde-haired boy. It took Naruto pouting at them and then giggling at their shocked faces to get them to realize who he was, because instead of a long, blonde-haired boy in generic traditional clothing that he received by bathing with Yuki the day of their meeting, there was a gently bred young girl with soft white hair and deep blue eyes. Naruto was told that he'd be sharing a carriage with Yuki, as to continue giving the illusion that Naru was her child, and they all shared a moment when he tilted his head in thought and asked why he had to act any differently then. After all, he was their child, and it didn't change the fact that they were his family. The carriage ride was long but surprisingly not as bumpy as Naruto had been expecting, but that may have been because half of the time was spent curled up next to his Yuki Kawa-chan and listening to her stories or just enjoying her humming while she brushed his hair. He'd never felt so safe, and even though he loved his whole family, he knew, and he suspected they knew it too, but he knew that Yuki Kawa-chan was his favorite. The other half of the journey, however, was spent by Naruto playing with a peculiar device that they'd given him. It was merely cosmetic to his disguise, but Naruto was still fascinated by it. It was a tezzen or a fan. It was a simple young lady's tezzen that matched the color of the obi on his kimono, and was made from a sturdy wood. Despite being a mundane item, as many others believed, Naruto spent hours playing with it, flicking it open in various ways or at different angles and spinning it around his wrists. The feeling, the simple wood and fabric paper that they used to line it was addicting to the now white-haired child. He'd never had toys before, but the items that he did find, either broken or just trash, took a place in his mind for life. He spent time with the items, seeing how they worked and how they could be fixed. It was just how his mind worked, and this tezzen was no different. He analyzed anything that his eyes could pick up, and it was only as they approached that Naruto found himself humming that tune he'd learned from Yuki during their first bath, and smiling with delight over the simple piece of equipment. What Naruto failed to realize was that apart from cooing Yuki, he had managed to attract an audience. Itachi Uchiha was very bored. She was a ninja, and she and her best friend Shursui Uchiha had been sent to Konoha's outpost with her father Fugaku Uchiha to oversee the fire daimyo's crossing personally on orders of the Sandaime Hokage. Upon their arrival to the western outposts, they'd informed the ninja and kunoichi stationed there to be on the lookout for the fire daimyo and his family's caravan. They then had to wait a further 3 hours before it was a Hyuga border ninja that spotted their approach. Itachi looked at her father in sheer disgust as she watched him puff himself up like a peacock. She muffled a giggle at the terminology. He was exactly like a peacock, prancing around and puffing himself up to look more important than those that weren't Uchiha. That was something she didn't agree with. Her father, the clan leader, and their esteemed elders of the Uchiha clan, they pranced around belittling any of the other clans for being inferior to the Uchiha clan, and it wasn't endearing the clan to Konoha. In fact, it was having quite the reverse effect in that other clans and even the villagers themselves were growing weary and wary of them. She and Shursui were on guard quite often now, even when they took something simple like a stroll through the village these days. Sure, they were greeted kindly and praised as they were hailed geniuses of the Uchiha, but underneath the polite facade was fear and distrust. The rest of the village distrusted the Uchiha since it was rumored that an Uchiha was suspected of instigating the Kyuubi attack 4 years ago. No one knew where the rumor started. She suspected the council. But her father had all but ignored the diplomacy of the Hokage and instead puffed himself up to make the Uchiha clan and in turn him seem more important. If this continued, she was unsure for the Uchiha clan's future. She was brought out of her thoughts by Shisui, who had decided that it'd be a brilliant idea to elbow her quite harshly. "Na Itachi-chan?" He whined. She ignored him and he repeated several times before grounding out an "Itachi-ken?" "What, Shisui?" She whispered harshly. Eye-twitching, but you could make out the tiniest of twitches to her lips. "What do you want?" "Nothing. Just thought you should stop looking like a fun-sized Shinigami. All morose and grumpy with that gleam of death in your eyes." He spoke, getting very creative as he described the traits before he chuckled at his own words. "I do not look like a fun-sized Shinigami," she exclaimed, harsher than she expected. She then blushed. He was riling her up to get a reaction. It was a weird hobby of his, examining the responses given and learning how the brains of others worked. She could hear him laughing softly, so she let out an HN and glanced down the road once more, ignoring the childish grumbles of Shisui. As the Fire Daimyo's caravan arrived at the western outpost, Itachi and Shisui were given an extra lesson on checking for threats by the guards. After they were no longer needed, Shisui had immediately wandered off to talk to the ninja that were guarding the Fire Daimyo and his family. She knew that one was the son of the Sanname Hokage, but the other was a monk. She pondered on how a monk could be a shinobi and if that was in fact a conflict of their beliefs when she saw her. The adorable child in question seemed completely engrossed in learning everything about her Tessen. The child was a delicate-looking child with long pure white hair and mesmerizing blue eyes that sparkled each and every time she discovered something new about her fan, and her dazzling smile when she succeeded in accomplishing a spectacularly well-executed spin release was as mesmerizing as her eyes were. Itachi ignored the outside world as she stared at the child. Even with her remarkable skills born from hours spent training in emotional control, she was failing as she gazed on the extremely cute little creature in front of her, and if the slight pink on her cheeks was any indication, she was blushing. The child spotted her staring and squeaked. She hid behind the fan and blushed in embarrassment, hitting her head as she hid. "Eh? Kawaii." Itachi's inner girly nature squealed before it was ruthlessly squashed down. The absolutely adorable girl peeked slowly over her fan at her, and Itachi managed a cough to cover her moment of girly weakness. Though when the young girl heard the cough, she perked up and glanced curiously at her. "Are you okay?" Itachi managed to ask finally. "Eh? Why, yes, I'm fine, thank you." The girl responded, her voice soft and sweet while caressing the spot where her head had been struck by the fan with delicate-looking hands. What a nice voice, like chiming bells, Itachi thought to herself, unknowingly staring once more. And what small hands. "Naru-chan? Who are you talking to, little one?" she heard come from the carriage. "Naru? Her name is Naru?" Itachi pondered to herself before noticing the girl start, and cutely pout to the unidentified voice. "Little one? How appropriate." Itachi heard the girl respond and then quietly, but not quietly enough, say, "You're going to embarrass me." "Oh? Making new friends already? I'm so proud of you, Naru-chan," he heard the voice say again. Itachi couldn't help nor stop the quiet laugh that came from her throat, and she found herself on the receiving end of the most adorable glare she'd ever seen. It didn't stop the laugh, in fact. Her shoulders shook slightly and her laugh became more pronounced. The young girl seemed to sigh in resignation before murmuring to the person in the carriage. Itachi then noticed that the Hokage's son approached the carriage, Shisui hot on his tail, and by the look on the younger Sarutobi's face, he was trying to shake the pest that was Shisui Uchiha. He spared her a glance before turning to the carriage door. "My ladies," he stated, he was in character as Naruto was in disguise after all. "The horses for the Fire Daimyo's carriage have been injured and we have no choice but to hold our position until the horses have been rested and treated. If you wish to leave the carriage, then you must be escorted by Chiriku, myself, or one of the guards here." Naruto suddenly paused as it felt like someone or something was watching him. He glanced out his window and spotted a nice-looking boy staring at him with slightly pink cheeks. While Naruto had come out of shell quite quickly considering his childhood, he was still shy around strangers, particularly nice strangers. So he did the only thing he could think of. He squeaked in embarrassment and hid behind his fan, blushing all the while. He somehow managed to hit his head on the fan on the way, though. His heart was pounding and he fought the urge to hide, and despite his usually shy nature in front of strangers, he managed to gather the courage to peek over the fan and look back at the boy. The boy coughed, and Naruto took that as a go for it sign and perked up. Squashing down his nerves, he looked curiously at the boy in front of the carriage. "Are you okay?" the boy asked kindly. "Eh? Why, yes, I'm fine, thank you," Naruto responded softly, rubbing his head gently. The boy was staring again. "Naru-chan? Who are you talking to, little one?" Naruto started. He forgot that Yuki was in the carriage still. Naruto pouted softly as he turned to Yuki. "Mao. I'm not that little Yuki Ka-san." Naruto replied softly. "You're going to embarrass me." Yuki stifled a giggle and glanced out the window through the curtain. "Oh? Making new friends already? I'm so proud of you, Naru-chan," she announced just a little too loud for Naruto's tastes. He heard the boy start laughing quietly and mustered all the strength he could to give the strongest glare he could manage. It didn't help. If anything, the boy started laughing a little harder and his shoulders shook in a futile effort to stop. Naruto sighed in surrender, and muttered mutinously to Yuki, who was also giggling to herself. Naruto heard somebody approach the carriage door, and breathed a sigh of relief to hear Asuma's voice. "My ladies," he stated. Naruto glared at Asuma, failing to see that it wasn't doing anything but entertain the man. "The horses for the Fire Daimyo's carriage have been injured and we have no choice but to hold our position until the horses have been rested and treated. If you wish to leave the carriage, then you must be escorted by Chiriku, myself, or one of the guards here." Asuma glared back at the Uchiha boy that was still bothering him. He didn't know what Chiriku had said to this boy, but the brat wouldn't leave him alone. He was doing his best to ignore the Uchiha brat when Chiriku approached him. Chiriku came forward from the front carriage and whispered a message to relay to Lady Yuki and the little one from the Fire Daimyo. Asuma sighed and spared a glance to the messy-haired Uchiha brat that wouldn't leave him alone. Before glaring murderously at Chiriku, he started to walk down towards the carriage that contained Lady Yuki and the little lady. He heard Naruto say something about being embarrassed before he noticed another Uchiha boy trying and failing not to laugh. He saw the glare Naruto gave the boy, and Asuma, being the protective person he had unknowingly become, started to entertain thoughts of seeing how many wind blades the Uchiha brat could take before being repentant of his actions. He was pulled from his darkening thoughts when he arrived at the door to the carriage. "My ladies," he stated. He had to resist the urge to choke after he received a look from Naruto. "The horses for the Fire Daimyo's carriage have been injured and we have no choice but to hold our position until the horses have been rested and treated. If you wish to leave the carriage, then you must be escorted by Chiriku, myself, or one of the guards here." Asuma glanced at both of the Uchiha boys. The one that had been annoying him was now annoying the other boy. "Yes, freedom. I can finally have a cigarette." He pulled one out of his pack and was ready to light one when he felt the gaze of expressive blue eyes. Naruto was glancing at him with curiosity, and whispered something to Yuki. When he heard a quiet response, Naruto's curiosity-filled eyes changed to ones of worry. Nah? You shouldn't use those things, Asuma-san," Naruto said forcibly. Oh god. He was giving him that look, and were those tears coming? "Yuki-ka-san said that you could die early if you used those." Naruto had practically sobbed the last bit out, and he felt all his defenses come crashing down. Don't worry, little one, I won't use them, without you around again," he hastily said to calm the adorable creature down. "Promise?" Naruto whispered with a hiccup and pleading eyes. "Absolutely," he replied promptly. "Good," Naruto said sternly. Asuma turned quickly to escape, and in doing so failed to see the vulpine grin that had made its way onto Naruto's face. "Kurane, you're a genius." He totally fell for that. "You're very welcome, Naruto-chan," was the reply from deep in his mind. After getting permission from Yuki to take a walk, Naruto gracefully stepped out of the carriage and made his way over to the boy he'd seen and briefly talked with from before. The boy had shoulder-length black hair tied in a loose ponytail at the nape of his neck and was wearing black shorts and a dark blue short-sleeved high-collared t-shirt with a weird-looking red and white fan on the back. He possessed the standard kunai and shuriken pouches and had a tanto or short sword strapped to the small of his back. His look was completed by his Konoha hitite strapped to his forehead. The boy he was talking to, being annoyed by, was dressed similarly except for the wild black hair he possessed as opposed to the straight hair of the first, and that his tanto was slightly longer and strapped to his shoulder instead of his lower back. As he approached, he heard the one with wild hair say something that must have annoyed the first, as the first boy turned around and poked him square in the ribs, causing the wild-haired boy to wince and struggle to catch his breath. "Hello there, ninja-san," he began softly, only to be interrupted by the wild-haired boy who had miraculously recovered and instantly took hold of Naruto's hand. Hello, my name is Shursui Uchiha," the boy started, and after energetically waving hands for a minute stopped and got in Naruto's face. "Wow. You have really blue eyes. Did you know that? And wow, your hand is really soft." And the boy, Shursui, was interrupted with a sharp slap to the back of the head with the other boy glaring at him. While Shursui was crouched on the ground pouting and grumbling about abusive friends, the other boy took a step forward, and remembering his etiquette training, bowed while gently taking Naruto's hand. Placing a soft kiss to the back of the knuckles, he looked the blushing Naruto in the eyes and introduced himself. "I am Itachi Uchiha, first child of the clan's head, my lady." Naruto could hear his big sister giggling loudly in the back of his mind as he blushed a crimson red. Itachi let out the faintest of smirks. "Works every time. A little suave for my tastes, but even young girls are taught proper etiquette these days." "Prince Charming strikes again," Shursui drawled blankly with just a hint of bitterness. He then chuckled and prodded Itachi, adding, "Another member to your ever-growing fan club, eh?" Itachi slapped him in the back of the head again, and Shursui went right back to poking the ground whilst sulking. Naruto laughed softly, and both Uchiha stopped and stared at the adorable child with her bell-like chiming laugh. "You are both acting like the comedy act that I saw once when they visited." Naruto giggled. Well, from what he could see from the room in the basement with the mud-stained and cracked window, they were well rehearsed, just like you two seem to be. Naruto continued until he heard a menacing cough from the depths of his mind. "I've forgotten proper etiquette. My name is Naru Shinji, first child of the Fire Daimyo. It's very nice to meet you both, Itachi-san, Shursui-san." Naruto remembered to bow politely to both and was rewarded by stunned looks of awe by both boys. Naruto smiled his dazzling smile, and caused both boys to gain a light pink tint to their cheeks, but for different reasons. "As so adorable." So Keikawaii, girly Itachi squealed in her mind. I knew I'd win the fair lady's favor. Inner Shursui thought with a fluttering sigh. Naruto paused after his introduction and appeared deep in thought. He sniffed the air for a moment before returning to his thoughts, and then repeated the process. He tilted his head briefly and chewed on his bottom lip before he glanced to Itachi and then to Shursui. Despite the training that he'd received, he was still a child, and as such he didn't know why he asked or even where the courage to ask came from, but there was something about the smell coming from Itachi that put him at ease, and he found himself asking nonetheless. Nah? Itachi-san, are you a boy or a girl? Naruto asked. Innocent face tilted to the side and thought, you certainly look like a boy, Itachi-san, but you smell like a girl. It was unknown at that moment in time, but that would be the start of a relationship, that would be the start of a glorious future between the two of them. Itachi gasped softly as she awoke from her restless nap. She never slept anymore. It was the price she paid for being not only the eldest child of the clan head, but also the prodigious Uchiha clan pin-up ninja. She snorted to herself. That's the only way my father uses me after all, she thought to herself. As Itachi proceeded to brush the tangles out of her hair, she reminisced on the curious child of the Daimyo. Flashback. The adorable child seemed deep in thought. She sniffed the air for a moment before returning to her thoughts, and then repeated the process many times. She tilted her head briefly and chewed on her bottom lip before she glanced to Itachi and then to Shursui. Nah? Itachi-san, are you a boy or a girl? The girl asked. Innocent face tilted to the side and thought, you certainly look like a boy, Itachi-san, but you smell like a girl. It was a simple question, but its effect had hit Itachi like a Doton jutsu to the stomach. She remembered hearing Shursui cough next to her in surprise, but before she could answer the child, that monk/ninja, Chiriku she'd learnt later, approached them, apologized deeply for her curiosity, and led the apologetic child back to the carriage as they'd found replacement horses for the fire daimyo's carriage. The daimyo's child watched them from the window of her carriage as the caravan began to leave again. She had bowed her head once more to each of them, and whispered an apology to Itachi quietly. Despite the quietness of the apology, Itachi heard it clear as day. It was as if the very breeze itself bent to the child's whim, and carried the simple message to her. Flashback end. That life-changing moment had happened nearly a month ago now, but despite the length of time since the encounter, Itachi continued to replay that moment over and over again in her mind. How would she even answer that question? The answer to that question was complicated, and something that she was ashamed to speak about out loud. You see, Itachi was born with a medical condition so rare that it had only been recorded 3 times in shinobi history. The texts were far too old to decipher now, but it was still documented nonetheless. Itachi was born a hermaphrodite or futanari, calling herself a futa. Short for futanari was easiest, she had decided, and those that knew also called it the same. Being born a futa was considered a good sign, a blessing for most clans, but the Uchiha clan was not one of those clans. It also made her a freak to her father, as her father had commented on many times. Her father was disgusted with her birth defect, he called it, though Itachi wasn't sure if it was a defect, or just something that made her unique. Most of the time, she would shrug that line of thought away, but when she couldn't, she turned to her mother, Mikoto Uchiha. Her mother was her pillar of strength in their family. She was the one Itachi had come to whenever she had nightmares or needed a shoulder for her tears. Her little brother, Sasuke, thought she was a boy, just like everybody else. Even her name, Itachi, was deliberately given by her father so they could hide her femininity. Then there was the personal training. She glared at her reflection in the mirror. The moment that she'd awoken her Sharingan and chakra was the day her father started training her. He was brutal on her, and refused to acknowledge her as a girl. So a boy she became to the world. Yes, Itachi referred to herself as a girl, not a boy. Her body was that of a girl with extra parts that belonged to a boy, but she knew from the clan's physician that as she grew older, her body would not shape itself more than necessary. What he meant was that when she grew up, she'd still be able to have children, but she would never look like a womanly woman. At best she could expect to look like a below-average woman. At worst, she may look like a pretty boy. Luckily, her would grow and function as normal, with the exception of a massively reduced rate of growth, but if she were to have children they'd operate properly. She was told that her testicles were internal and that her penis functioned properly. Of course it works. I piss through it every morning after all, she thought to herself irritably. She had studied her body herself though. While not a common condition, Tsunade Senju of the Sannin had published works regarding the phenomenon of the futa. Through Tsunade Senju's thesis she discovered that while she used her penis to urinate, she didn't get hard or feel pleasure. So it could be fixed, but the problem was that it was still connected internally, and that meant that only 2 people had the ability to fix her Tsunade Senju or Orochimaru. It was laughable to her that the only 2 people in the world that could help her wouldn't. Tsunade Senju, while acclaimed in her skills, not only hated Konoha for sins that couldn't be healed but also because she loathed the Uchiha clan. And with Orochimaru, he'd more likely heal her, but take her Sharingan, her blood, her organs and probably even her chastity. Both were out of her reach and it tore her up inside. The deepest but most unobtainable of her dreams was to eventually settle down and have a family of her own. A family where she could be herself and free to be a mother. She had never told anyone of this dream, but she knew that it was one that might never come true, so she kept it to herself. She supposed that it was for the best to keep it a secret. Apart from her family, minus Sasuke, and the physician, only one other person knew, her best and only friend Shursui Uchiha. While Shursui could be really annoying, he was dependable, and she'd rather have him watching her back than the entire Uchiha clan combined. That wasn't the problem for Itachi though. The main problem was that once the clan's physician informed her father of her condition, and how it would affect her in the future, he was positively gleeful. He used it as an excuse to increase the intensity of her training to mold him into the perfect shinobi for the clan's image, and that was why she continued to exist as a shinobi and not a kunoichi. So when a child that had never met her before asked her such a question, she froze. Come to think of it, Itachi thought to herself, how did she actually pick that up? The Inuzuka clan certainly couldn't, and they are famous for their sense of smell. Curious. She completed her task of taming her hair and tied it in its usual ponytail. She was tempted to put it up in a more girly look, but the last time her father caught her mother, and her doing that, he went ballistic and not only punished her but her mother as well. She eyed her own reflection with distaste for a minute or so before strapping on her kunai pouch and retightening her hitate. Another day in my glorious life, she thought bitterly, at least with her father's attention all on her, Sasuke could have a normal childhood. And I'd rather die than have father put Sasuke through my childhood hell. Itachi bid good morning to her mother and sat down at the table for breakfast. She glanced to the left and right with trepidation, and her mother must have picked up on it. He's in a meeting with the esteemed elders, Itachi-chan, Mikoto reassured her daughter. When you see Hokage-sama today, inform him that your father and the elders are up to something. I don't like how the future looks if they are plotting something. Yes, mother, Itachi replied in her monotonic voice. Mikoto sighed to herself. Her husband had all but destroyed her gentle little girl. She remembered how close they used to be before that damned physician opened his big mouth to her father. After that, her little girl vanished, replaced by the perfect image that her husband expected his son to be. Fugaku only ever cared about his own position anyway, but with the clan beginning to become ostracized from the village, some of the other men were starting to come around to her husband's propaganda. I fear for Konoha should Fugaku achieve his goals. Itachi finished her breakfast and bid farewell to her mother. She was looking forward to today as it was her day off, and all she had on that day was an appointment with the Hokage to vocalize her report from last month's meeting at the outpost. It meant no father-son time. I wonder why the Hokage has been so frantic lately. Itachi pondered. Did he lose something? It wasn't just the Sandaime acting that way though. Anbu and even Root had been a buzz of activity as they combed through the streets, alleyways and even the sewers for something. Itachi suddenly came to a stop. The Jinchuriki. That was the only answer she could come up with if both Anbu and Root were out in such numbers. Itachi had heard the rumors of the demon child, of course, but she understood Fuinjutsu to some degree and knew that if the Yondaime had sealed the Kyubi, then it wasn't going anywhere, and harming a container only lead to a leaking or broken container. She had even caught a glimpse of him once. Just the back of his dirty blonde hair, but it was a glimpse anyway. He was being shouted at by the matron of the orphanage, and Itachi just assumed that he'd misbehaved or something along those lines. Itachi continued to think about the little blonde as she continued walking towards her destination, the Hokage Tower. Hiruzen Sarutobi stared out his window and he gritted his teeth in frustration and guilt. The guilt he felt had never been as strong as it was right now. 5 weeks ago his predecessor's son disappeared. It was bad enough that said predecessor's son was the Jinchuriki, but he was also the heir of 2 clans and the heir to the royal throne of Yuzu. If word got out to the other nations, Konoha would be crushed, not just physically but politically as well. It was because of Naruto and his family's blood that half of their treaties existed in the first place, as they were not signed by Konoha but by the royal family of Yuzu. Kushina had been responsible for over 80% of the political power amassed on Konoha's behalf in the last war alone. Add that to the fact that the only reason they had the political power of Yuzu behind them in the first place was because of the union between the first Hokage and Nito Uzumaki. Meant that by default, about 90% of Konoha's political sway hinged on a single child. A child that he had ignored out of guilt. Hiruzen growled at himself. He was weak, and in his weakness he neglected the child that held the future of Konoha in his hands. The ANBU team assigned to watch him reported him missing days after he had disappeared in the first place. He had no choice but to make examples out of them, and by the end of their vitriol of excuses and misplaced blame, Konoha was down an ANBU team. 5 perfectly trained soldiers dead because they couldn't keep their ignorance in check. I'm tired of all of my past mistakes coming to bite me in the arse. First Orochimaru and now Naruto. Hiruzen lamented before a fire began to burn in his eyes. Not anymore. No one fucks with my law, my commands any longer. It's time the village remembered that this is a military village, a dictatorship. His vow was too little too late though. Naruto was gone, and all it took was a single chatty villager to ruin the veil of protection that they'd managed to put up. He was brought out of his reverie by a knock at the door. His secretary nervously bowed. Could she feel his power? His resolve? Good, Lord Hokage? She stuttered out. Yes? Hiruzen replied. Itachi Uchiha to see you, my lord. She informed before hastily making a tactical retreat. The Sandaime ignored her retreating form and turned his attention to the young man before him. Itachi politely nodded to the villagers and smiled at the excited children as they rushed past her to get to the playground or park. Itachi fought to protect their smiles. She'd seen the horrors of death and witnessed the Kyubi attack 4 years ago, and would do anything to prevent that war or death to return to Konoha. Itachi finally made it to the Hokage Tower and walked up to the receptionist. Excuse me? Itachi asked cordially. I believe that I have an appointment with the Hokage. The receptionist glanced up and upon recognizing Itachi, proceeded to straighten her hair and blush. Great. A fangirl. Itachi shuddered mentally. Of course, Mr. Uchiha. I'll inform the Hokage that you've arrived, she responded with a horrible attempt at a sultry tone. Itachi gagged in her mind. Just because she wore a headband and was considered an adult, didn't mean that she wanted to be hit on at 8 years old. As soon as the Hokage's office door was open, they were swept up in a power that was washing off the Hokage in waves. Lord Hokage? She stuttered out. Yes? Hiruzen replied. Itachi Uchiha to see you, my lord. She informed the Sandaime before hastily retreating past Itachi. She fought the smirk that threatened to overtake her face, and thankfully she succeeded in her attempt. She saw the Hokage scrutinizing her, and she stood a little straighter. You requested my presence, Lord Hokage. Itachi clearly stated. At ease, Itachi, the Sandaime responded, and suppressed a sigh when Itachi remained rigid. You are here to give a vocalized report of the successful mission to oversee the daimyo's crossing through the outpost. So report. Itachi gave her report, and the Sandaime was pleased. If only the other shinobi took the time to report in such a manner. When Itachi mentioned the child, Hiruzen's eyes sharpened. Explain. Itachi, while confused, reported it all the same, taking extra care to describe the child. So the daimyo and his family have finally had a child, Hiruzen thought with a smile. Has it really been 3 years since I visited them or had tea with the daimyo? I'll have to send along my congratulations. Itachi fidgeted for a moment, and the Sandaime recognized the need to say something. You may speak freely, Itachi. My lord Hokage, Itachi began. She paused for a moment to organize her thoughts before continuing. My father and the esteemed elders are planning something. I do not know what they are planning, but they are planning something nonetheless, and my mother and I fear that these plans are not for the good of Konoha. Hiruzen was not surprised to hear the venom in Itachi's voice, as he was aware of the manner of training that Itachi had gone through. I see, Hiruzen replied gravely. He knew Itachi was loyal to Konoha, but just how loyal? And your intentions? Why report it to me when their plans are still unknown? I'm reporting now to beg for leniency on behalf of the innocents that may be harmed by your retaliation, Itachi stated promptly in a bow. Should it come to violence, I need to know that the actions of the fathers, mothers, and adults that are guilty are not going to be placed on the innocent children or families. Hiruzen smiled. It was nice to see such loyalty and caring from one so young. The Uchiha were in good hands with Itachi as the heir. Very well, your words shall be deliberated on and considered with great importance. Dismissed. Thank you, my lord, Itachi replied in relief, and after bowing once more she turned to leave when the Hokage asked a further 2 questions. Itachi-kun, do you know the Jinchuriki? He asked in a serious tone. I've seen him once, Lord Hokage, she replied before continuing at his raised eyebrow. The elderly matron of the orphanage seemed to be shouting and punishing him for something that he'd done. He was filthy, like he hadn't been bathed but just stood there and took his punishment. The matron, she seemed like a strict woman. Hiruzen sighed to himself. That sounded about right. After Ibiki and Anko were done with her, she'd be executed in front of the villagers and their representative council as a warning and message saying don't fuck with me anymore, and for now, it was working. And you obviously know about his treatment? What do you say about it? What's your opinion? The Sandaime prodded, interested to hear the Uchiha clan's prodigy and his opinion. Permission to speak freely, my lord? Itachi asked, and at Hiruzen's nod continued, this village has really screwed up. I've studied the law and old clan treaties. The Uzumaki clan commanded the highest percentage of political power in not only Konoha, but the entire elemental nations. I would suggest a campaign to identify the perpetrators and root them out for any possible information regarding the boy. It is my opinion, however, that we are too late. If the child has left the village or been forced to leave, then it displays that the villagers are unaware of the power the child wields. And I'm not talking about the bijou sealed within him. Itachi took a breath before continuing. Furthermore, the Ninja Academy does not teach the importance of Yuzu or the Uzumaki clan, and I fear that even though your law is in place, if the child grew up in Konoha, his treatment would not change. It is my opinion that he should have never been announced as the Jinchuriki in the first place. Itachi waited and recognized the dismissal when the Hokage waved him out. Itachi-kun is right, he muttered to himself. I messed up. Hiruzen pulled his pipe out and lit it with a small katan jutsu. He went right back to gazing out at the village. I fear the future for this village now lies with whoever has Naruto. As Itachi left the Hokage tower, she found her mind drifting onto what her father would call frivolous topics for his perfect poster boy of a son. Her mood started to sour at the very thought of him, so she distracted herself with her original train of thought. She thought about her life, her family, her mother and Sasuke, and her village, and most important of all, her deepest thought. She even thought about as to whether or not anyone other than her mother, and if she squinted just right, sure sway, would love her just as she was. Her entire being screamed at her to let out the pent-up emotion, to release it and stop it from bubbling up inside of her, so hastening her pace, she practically flew to the nearest training ground. After checking the log and subsequently discovering it empty, she logged her name on the file and fled into the deepest part of the training ground, and once there, she huddled into a ball in the crook of a tree near a small stream and wept. It's not fair, she thought bitterly. Why can't I have been born normal, either a boy or a girl, just normal? She stayed there for Kami knows how long, but by the time her tears of pain, frustration and misery finally halted. The moon was already high in the sky. Itachi sniffled once more before finding the stream and washing her face. If anyone asked about her puffy eyes, she could claim overuse of the Sharingan, and no one would ask twice. Well, everyone except for her mother and Shursui. They both seemed to have a knack for knowing what was going on with her emotions. Funny considering Shursui couldn't read the emotion in a whole room to save his life, and despite his hobby of studying human responses, but he seemed to be able to read her like an open book. Oh, both of them knew that Shursui would never be more than a really close brother, the annoying one true, but a brother nonetheless. But they were both perfectly fine with that. Itachi picked herself up from the stream where she had been staring at her reflection once again and made to leave. When she stopped once more, she turned right and left, activating her Sharingan before repeating the process. Once she was absolutely certain that she was alone, she reached a hesitant hand up to her ponytail, and after a second or two gently pulled on it. Her hair fell in a soft thud on her neck. It wasn't that long, but to have it free was something she dared not to even try. Like the very thought of not having her hair up in its usual ponytail was taboo, she whipped her head around suspiciously, as if daring invisible watchers out of their hiding spots and catching her before it was too late. Her breath hitched, and she peeked a glance at her reflection and quickly memorized it with her Sharingan. With her hair down, it was clear to see she took after her mother. Not that it wasn't noticeable before, but with her hair down, and still slightly wet from washing her face, it was a scaringly close resemblance. Itachi ran a shaking hand through her hair softly, and she could feel the fresh tears about to overtake her once more. She was about to start again when a cough from behind her caused her to violently start, and she whirled around with high chunin speeds as she readied her kunai. Her spin ended and she came face to face with Shursui. His eyes were softer than she'd ever remembered, and it was only now she realized that he had probably been there the entire time, but was content to give her the moment without interruption. Hey was all Shursui said, but he did open his arms slightly while looking away with a bit of a blush. Was he offering her a hug? Itachi's tears started flowing once more before she accepted the hug with a soft smile. It'll be okay, Itachi, Shursui stated, as if it was a fact. One day you won't have to please anyone but yourself and your husband when, not if, but when you get married. I know you'll meet the right person one day and fulfill your wish of having a big family. I'd be the best uncle. Itachi remained there in Shursui's arms for a few more minutes before releasing him from her death grip. Thank you, Shursui, was all she whispered. Her emotions were still running on high, and the adrenaline-like feeling it caused was starting to fade. When it did, she knew she'd be exhausted, so she fixed her hair and readorned her emotionless mask. We should go back, she said quietly, and Shursui nodded dramatically. As you command, my lady. He whispered back enthusiastically, I signed you out of the logbook. Itachi just rolled her eyes, but you could see the small smile threatening to break through her mask. Trust Shursui to make her feel better by whispering something so stupid. Both nodded to each other before they both shined or body flickered out of the training ground, destination home. Simultaneously they appeared in front of Itachi's house, and after a shared glance bade farewell to one another. Shursui turned around and headed home with a final wave, and Itachi crept silently into the house. She spied the note addressed to her on the table and read it quietly. Itachi, your father has been called to an important meeting and I've been requested to attend. Sasuke is being cared for by Shursui's parents, and there's some dinner on the table. Your mother, Mikoto. Itachi felt a little guilty as she was supposed to look after Sasuke this evening, but she had an emotional explosion, and after said explosion she was feeling tired, so with an uncharacteristically loud snort and a shrug, and she went to bed. Her dreams that night were plagued by visions of her training. The visions were getting worse, each being stronger and longer than the last, but then a vision of a certain little child with her soft laugh and her utterly adorable smile shone through, and for the first time since the beginning of her training she slept. Not a nap like she was used to, but sleep, and it was all possible because of that adorable little angel in her dreams, an angel that kept the bad memories at bay. Evening had arrived by the time the Fire Daimyo and his entourage arrived at the Imperial City. Naruto was instantly enamored by the Imperial City's tall buildings and the extravagance that radiated from them. Though he couldn't shake the uneasiness that had descended upon his stomach, there was so much metal and not enough nature. Naruto had always been close to nature, well, as close as he could be whilst in the care of Konoha's orphanage, but after he'd been unceremoniously thrown out, he found himself surrounded by it constantly. The peace and serenity that overcame him when he was surrounded by nature was indescribable. Naruto often found his mind wandering aimlessly or even in a calm and light form of meditation when surrounded by it, and the peace that overtook his heart and soul was something of a blessing to him. After being adopted by the Fire Daimyo, Masahiko Shinji and his wives, Kaoru Shinji and Yuki Kagae Shinji, Naruto relished the opportunity to spend time in their wonderful gardens that dotted their castle and home. In fact, there had been several occasions where Asuma or Chirika had to collect him from the gardens for meals or baths, but Naruto could resist the call that drew him to nature. So to be surrounded by so much concrete and metal was not only foreign to Naruto in appearance, but the queasy feeling that bubbled in his stomach was uncomfortable to the white-haired youth. At some point his uneasiness must have been visible on his face as Yuki had frowned and asked if he was alright. I feel strange, Yuki-ka-chan, Naruto replied. There's not enough nature. Naru-chan, what do you mean by not enough nature? Yuki inquired softly. Naruto frowned momentarily. He wasn't sure himself, but he responded as best as he could. Nature is relaxing and welcoming. He replied with a tone of thought. This place feels wrong not welcoming. Yuki hummed to herself. Of course she and the others had noticed his fondness to nature, but perhaps there was more to it than just preference. Naruto-chan, there are wonderful gardens at the Imperial Palace. Yuki finally said. You don't need to go out into the city if it makes you uncomfortable, sweetie. No. Naruto replied quickly before he blushed in embarrassment. I want to explore the city. I was just thinking out loud, Ka-chan. Yuki giggled as Naruto replied quickly. It was so adorable, and she could read the emotions on his face like an open book. They fell into a comfortable silence as they passed the many open shops and stalls, each stall offering different items ranging from food to wondrous and exotic wares. Naruto spared a glance to a shop window where a sad little pig watched the people passing by. He could see the intelligence in its eyes and made a mental note to visit the store. After all, the pig was looking lonely and Naruto hated to see such a cute animal in such a state. The little pig in question spotted him as the carriage rode past, and Naruto smiled his soft smile and waved at the intelligent pig. The pig perked up and its tail began to wag in delight at the cute child's antics, and Naruto found himself giggling at its antics as well. His laughter and delight drew the attention of many people in the markets, and they began to whisper excitedly as they pointed to the caravan that made its way to the Imperial Palace. Unsteadily stepping out of the carriage, Naruto marveled at the sheer size of the palace. It was a rather grand building, and if you looked carefully enough, you could see that it was a mixture of modern and traditional architecture. The central building was built traditionally, but you could see that the outer buildings and extensions were of a modern design. Despite the mixture, Naruto still couldn't shake the feeling bubbling within him as they approached the main entrance. Why he was still feeling that way, Naruto didn't know, but it made him anxious to get inside and feel sheltered from the industrialist city. Passing through the giant wooden doors, Naruto was met with a pleasantly warm feeling that replaced that feeling of unease inside him, for in front of the white-haired child was an enormous staircase. It was at least 3 stories high and 20 meters wide, but that paled in comparison to the expertly crafted plants and vines that adorned the sides and base. A wonderfully soft and fluffy carpet fell down the center and ran down the entire staircase. It was a royal red in color that bared the High no Kuni, or the Land of Fire's crest, in the exact center of the carpet. Naruto all but ran to the staircase and sighed in sheer relief as his feet set down on the first step. The staircase felt soothing and radiated the aura of nature. It felt as though the wood was alive and he couldn't get enough of the feeling. It was welcoming and engulfed him like a warm hug. Masahiko, Kaoru and Yuki stared in disbelief as Naruto all but curled in on himself in comfort on the first step of the grand staircase. It was made and crafted by Hashirama Senju himself as a gift to the Shinji clan when they united the various clans and formed the Land of Fire's government. It was only half a year later that Konoha had stabilized and become united under the efforts of the Senju clan, the Uchiha clan and of course, the Uzumaki clan. Masahiko, Kaoru and Yuki had all discussed Naruto's obsession with nature, but he, like Yuki, was starting to question if it was something more than just a quirk and more of a necessity for the effeminate child. Perhaps the Kyuubi was responsible for it, and then there were Naruto's abilities to bend nature. That's it. Masahiko realized Naruto needs to feel connected to nature because of his abilities. He spared a look to Kaoru and leaned to whisper his realization. Kaoru agreed with the notion and watched Naruto with tender eyes as she approached her adopted son. Naruto-chan, sweetie, we need to get you to bed. Kaoru prompted gently. Naruto shuffled on the bottom step and looked up at his mother. He pouted for a moment and gave her a look that begged to stay on the stairs. But Kaoru remained firm and Naruto agreed to go to bed. The fire daimyo asked Asuma to be his guard for the night, and looked to Yuki to take Naruto to his new room. The room itself was rather plain in appearance, but Yuki assured Naruto that he could decorate it as he pleased once they took him into the market to shop. Naruto was happy with that, but sleep crept up on him, and soon he was asleep. The next morning, Naruto woke to the sounds of a wide-awake city. Naruto instantly covered his ears and yelped in fear at the loud noises. Konoha was never this loud, but this city? The city was so loud that it hurt his ears and scared him. Asuma leapt into the room with his kunai drawn. He was instantly on guard as he scanned the room for the threat to Naruto. But when he saw the quivering form of Naruto with his hands squeezed over his ears, he rushed forward. Naruto, what's wrong, kid? Asuma asked, keeping his tone steady to help calm the child. Naruto turned to Asuma with a desperate look on his face. He used his head to gesture to the window, so that he didn't have to remove his hands from his ears. Asuma's eyes widened. Of course he has heightened senses from the Kyuubi, and he's not used to the noise. Asuma pulled a silencing seal from his pouch and set it down on Naruto's bedside table before activating it. Naruto instantly perked up and slowly pulled his hands away from his ears. As soon as he did, he gasped softly before leveling Asuma with the most brilliant smile Asuma had ever seen. Asuma choked on a breath as Naruto turned his expressive eyes onto him. Why did he have to be so adorable? Asuma's thoughts were interrupted by a giggle at the door. He turned and saw Yuki standing there watching the scene with mirth swimming in her eyes. He turned once more to Naruto, only to see him completely fascinated by the silencing seal. If the sparkle in his eyes were of any indication, typical Uzumaki reaction to a seal, Kushina was the same. Now Naruto-chan, Yuki chided in her soft tone, we need to get ready for the day. Okay Ka-chan, Naruto replied, can we go to the market today? Yuki looked at Naruto apologetically. Sorry Naruto-chan, but we've decided to just use some of the furniture here for your room until later. Naruto merely shrugged. Okay Ka-chan, can I stay on the staircase and read then? If that's what you want Naruto-chan. Yuki replied with a smile. Before he knew it, a week had already passed for the white-haired child. Naruto was completely at ease now in the Imperial City now, as he'd been using a form of meditation that he'd learned from his Kurane. His first disappointment was that they still wouldn't let him go to the markets, so he was unable to visit the little pig that he'd spotted when they arrived, but he hoped that he could visit soon. The second disappointment was that every time he inquired about the Uchiha girl, his father had shot him down, informing Naruto that it wasn't the best time to be communicating with anyone from Konoha. It had really upset him that he couldn't write and apologize properly to the girl. It had been his Kurane that had told him that he'd been very rude, not to mention rather forward. His father, the Daimyo, had explained that after a year he could write, but by then it'd be too late to do so. When Naruto asked why, his father explained it to him by saying that they had to wait for a year so no one tried to take Naruto from them, but in doing so, he didn't get it at first, but his father promised to explain when he grew up a bit. Despite these two disappointments, Naruto flourished at the Imperial Palace. The servants loved the white-haired child with every fiber of their being. As he'd been completely polite and humble to them, Naruto knew from experience how tough the chores and tasks were, so he always made sure the servants knew just how much he appreciated them and their efforts. He'd spent a lot of time with Yuki and Kaoru, whether that was with learning etiquette, calligraphy, or social and political education. Yuki and Kaoru had been very surprised with how quickly he took to the lessons, and it was soon after their second lesson that they realized just how smart their adopted child was. Naruto had effortlessly retained the information from his lessons, but what Yuki and Kaoru didn't know was that he practiced every day with his Kurane in his mindscape. And this was where Naruto was currently spending his time. On the outside, Naruto appeared to be meditating in the vast garden, underneath a beautiful and old cherry blossom tree. He'd already picked the perfect spot on a large, smooth rock nearest to the koi pond, so that the sounds of the splashing fish helped ease him into a meditative state. Kurane, I've completed the bending exercises for the earth style. Naruto spoke to his elder sister figure. That's wonderful Naru, I want you to continue practicing in your mindscape until it becomes habit. Then you can properly understand the fundamental basics for the real world and its elements. Kurama replied happily. Ever since Naruto had become more aware of the environment, and his subsequent lessons in meditation, he'd spent a lot more time with her. Okay Nei-chan, Naruto dutifully replied. You've only taught me water style and now earth style. Kurane, when can I learn the others? Good question Naru. To learn the fire and air style you must understand the difference between the flexibility and smooth flow of the water style, while learning the firm and rigid aspects of the earth style. Kurama responded in lecture mode. True, the air style has more to do with flexibility, but the fire style needs the firm footing that the earth style is known for. Understand? Naruto absorbed the knowledge like a sponge and then right back to practicing his earth style. Soon he'd be able to flow effortlessly between the two styles without pausing. But that was a long way off, due to his lack of training outside in the real world. Naruto-chan, it's getting late. Kurama spoke after observing Naruto's progress. Incredible. He's advancing so quickly. I estimated that it'd take twice as long as this before he'd reach this level of proficiency. Alright Kurane, he called back. Naruto ran up and hugged his big sister before leaving with a final good night. Naruto woke suddenly. Something was wrong. He didn't know what was wrong, but there was definitely something off. Naruto opened his eyes and took a deep breath as he sat up. The room that he now called his own was a large room, but despite its royal interior it was rather comfortable, if not homely. He stretched like a cat, and as he blinked to remove the remaining sleep from his eyes he spied movement. There was someone in his room. Naruto shuffled to the edge of the bed and gracefully swept both feet out of the bed covers and onto the cool floor. The presence hadn't identified with the code for the week, so it was either a servant or an enemy shinobi. Without Asuma there he couldn't tell. Just where was Asuma anyway? Naruto concentrated lightly and pushed some of his new power through the bottom of his feet, like Kurane had shown and taught him in his mind just that day. It was a sensory technique that used his new power and not his chakra, so it was great for sensing everyone and anything while still keeping a full reserve of chakra. Instantly his mind had created a perfect 3D projection of his room, and yes, there was someone with an unknown chakra in his room. He swallowed a lump in his throat. Had Konoha found out? Had they come to take him away from his new family? The unknown presence got closer to his tiny frame, and when it was close enough Naruto jumped out of its reach and fled out of the room. Naruto heard the curse that followed and he screamed for help as he continued to run in the direction of the grand staircase that separated the sides of the Imperial Palace. He had almost made it when he was harshly pushed into the ground, just as he'd reached the open room with the staircase. Naruto groaned in pain. He shook the dizziness off and tried to get up but was pushed back down. He smirked internally. Despite his fear now he could see his attacker. The attacker was clearly male, but Naruto was unable to make out his face due to the balaclava covering it. His clothes though were much more telling. They were scruffy and old but well kept. The flak jacket was a single strap off white color. So a Kumo ninja then? Was he a missing nin or was he hired? He couldn't tell because it was unknown without the presence of a Hittite for identification, but with the slight odor of sake permeating through the man's mask, Naruto would guess missing nin. No professional ninja, still in service to their village, would work drunk. What did scare Naruto was the look in the man's eyes. They were just like the ones he used to receive in the village, and it sent a shiver of revulsion down his spine. You sure gave me a workout, came the nasty grated-sounding voice of the drunken shinobi on top of him. Why did you run from me, my pretty little victim? The man laughed a garbled laugh and Naruto grew even more scared. No one will come to help you, he spoke nastily once more. My partner started a security breach on the other side of the palace, so we're all alone, my pretty. Why do you think there was no guard at your door? Naruto wanted to be sick. Whatever this man wanted to do with him wasn't good. Even his 4-year-old mind could process the craziness in the man's tone. Naruto was violently forced from his thoughts when the man ripped the top half of his sleeping yukata open. He fearfully looked up and made the mistake of looking the man in the eyes. There was something in his eyes that told Naruto that it would be all over soon, but not in the way Naruto wanted. I've never had a chance to cut up such a pretty child before, the man whispered with a clear tone of enjoyment mixed with sadism. I just love cutting pretty things to pieces. It's such a shame to scar that pretty face, but from the moment I saw you passing by in that carriage I knew I just had to cut you up. Torture scene. The man removed his gloves and started to caress and pinch Naruto's exposed torso. Naruto wanted to scream but was just too scared. He let out a whimper when the man used the kunai and nicked his neck roughly. The man seemed to like his whimpers, if that please grunt was anything to go by, and the man leaned over Naruto to sniff and lick at his neck where he had nicked him. Your blood tastes good, my pretty one. The man shivered with pleasure at the taste. I want. No, I need more. Tears started forming in Naruto's eyes and he felt his heart thumping violently in his chest. They only got worse when the man used the kunai from his pouch and began to slowly drag the sharp tip along Naruto's chest. You know I like to scar my prey before I really indulge my love of blood, the man spoke. It was a tone of joy and it disturbed Naruto greatly. And you're just so delicious. Let's move further down, shall we? True to his word, the man then followed up by licking the kunai clean before he continued dragging the kunai lower. There, he proceeded to cut at Naruto's exposed legs. What cute little toes you have, the man chuckled. I wonder will you miss them? He placed his kunai against Naruto's toes and proceeded to slowly slice at the sensitive padding of Naruto's feet, making sure to make a show of it by telling him what he was using his kunai on and how he was using it. Your pain tolerance is amazing. The man stated in surprise. I wonder how long that will last. What if I did this? With a sick twisted grin and a strong thrust he buried the kunai in Naruto's thigh. He ignored the blood and began to drag the kunai at an agonizingly slow pace up the bloody leg to the thigh. He gave a sharp slap to Naruto's exposed wound and using the kunai like a saw continued his fun by carving through his calf. Naruto couldn't take it anymore, so he finally screamed, much to the man's pleasure. Why yes, that's it. He yelled with a tone of pure pleasure. Scream for me, my pretty. He twisted the kunai to keep the wound from closing before he removed a smaller but thinner looking kunai from his pouch. Taking his attention from the open wound on the child's leg, he turned his demented gaze back to his chest. The man paused at the sight, but then he began to slice upwards from the stomach, slowly getting closer to Naruto's neck and face. The man paused once more before he used his free hand and yanked Naruto's head up off the floor, using the bloody kunai. He proceeded to hack away at Naruto's hair. I think I'll keep your hair as a souvenir, the man laughed, waving the hair around in Naruto's face. What do you think? Maybe your hair isn't enough. How about your pretty little eyes then? He unceremoniously dropped Naruto's head back to the ground. Naruto was dazed by the action, but he let out another strangled scream that again had the man quivering in pleasure. The man heard movement and cursed. He slapped Naruto across the face, but it was too late. He'd been busted. Torture scene over. Yuki and Keiru were very worried about Naruto. When the panic began with an explosion that had interrupted their evening tea, Chiriku had retrieved them not 5 minutes later, telling them of the seriousness of the situation. They were told that someone would be retrieving Naruto, but that hadn't diminished their worry over their precious child. However, 10 minutes later, there was no sign of either the guard or Naruto, and Yuki had a bad feeling. She turned to Keiru and they both nodded in agreement. They needed to find their son. Chiriku had felt the same as he looked to the fire daimyo's wives. The two wives both looked at each other before they headed carefully towards the staircase. When the trio heard Naruto's muffled scream, Yuki and Keiru, both in mother bear mode, rushed forward with Chiriku close behind. Yuki had arrived first, only to see a man in a mask slap her child across the face. There were angry bruises and horrible carved gashes that marred Naruto's skinny frame, and the look on Naruto's face was one of true terror and pain. Naruto's body was covered in blood and she could see a bloody kunai with a clump of his dyed white hair stuck to it. There was another kunai buried in Naruto's thigh, leaving a gaping wound. The man that had tortured Naruto now pulling out a fresh kunai and was bringing it up to Naruto's left eye. The vile man had the audacity to smirk once he had spotted her, and even with his mask she knew he was enjoying himself. Keiru had arrived to see the man smirk and gasped at the scene. She felt rage bubble up inside of her, but Yuki beat her to the charge. Yuki screamed at the man in fury and recklessly charged at him. The man, being a shinobi, was quicker though, and before she had even passed through the doorway he responded by throwing the kunai that he had previously held close to Naruto's left eye. The kunai flew quickly through the air. It pierced her straight into her chest and right through her right lung. Yuki's eyes widened as she slid to the floor in a boneless heap, not able to stand the pain, and not able to breathe. Shit, I missed. The man growled angrily before drawing another kunai and throwing it at the downed Kaguya. Chiriku, who was a step behind the two women, moved quickly. He managed to stop the kunai from piercing her head, but he failed to deflect the blunt end of the kunai from slamming into her head. He responded by using a high-powered wind-enhanced kunai to the man's head. The man's eyes widened momentarily before he fell onto Naruto. Chiriku heard Naruto start to cry and rushed over. He pushed the man's body off of Naruto, but once he bore witness to Naruto's marred form that was now drenched with blood, he swore to himself. Kaoru finally snapped out of her horror-struck form and rushed over to Yuki. She wailed as she beheld her fellow wife. Meanwhile, Chiriku saw a curtain and used it to fashion a covering for Naruto's body before he began to apply pressure to his wounds in an attempt to slow the bleeding. Naruto watched with teary eyes as the man on top of him died. Naruto felt the bile at the back of his throat. He didn't know why the man had done what he did to him, but he felt sick. This man was surely a demon. The man's crazed-looking eyes closed and Naruto finally started to cry. He'd sensed that Chiriku was there now, but what about Yuki Kao-chan? Wasn't she there too? Naruto winced painfully as Chiriku removed the man's weight from on top of him as it had dragged across the open cuts on his chest. Chiriku had used a nearby curtain to cover his body with, and once covered, applied pressure to his wounds. Still dizzy, Naruto managed to turn his head to the doorway where he had sensed his mother beforehand, only to meet her seemingly lifeless gaze. She was dead? His mother was dead, but they were supposed to live happily from now on, right? She promised to be there for him. Naruto's heart thumped loudly in his chest. His body started to shake. His breath sped up and became erratic as he watched Kaoru Kao-chan wail in despair over Yuki Kao-chan's downed form. Naruto felt himself speaking, repeating a chant over and over again. He didn't register the fact that Chiriku was trying to speak to him, trying to comfort him by telling him that it wasn't his fault. It was only then that Naruto registered that he was apologizing over and over again. Naruto started to pull himself across the wooden flooring to reach his mother's side when another man bolted through the door, pushing his mother's body away with reckless abandon. Naruto felt his chakra boil with a heat he had never felt before. It hummed under his skin and it felt like it was trying to force its way out of his body. Shit, I'm surrounded, cursed the man. This was clearly that vile man's partner. The man spotted Naruto and let out a sick chuckle. So you were the pretty thing that caught brother's eye. I can't say I'm surprised he chose to go after you. You are ever so pretty. Hell, I'm just sorry that I didn't get the chance to join in and cut that pretty face of yours right up, kid. That was it. Naruto snapped, and despite the pain, he stood shakily on his bloody feet. With a scream, the chakra that had been restrained burst out of his back. They took the form of several pointed chains that swayed ominously with their own, unheard rhythm. The chains suddenly lashed forward. They sped so quickly through the room that the man only had time to blink before one of the chains pierced his heart, and continued on by moving cleanly through his chest and out his back. The chain, in a creepy display, curved on itself like a serpent, and it, along with the dim golden glow of the other chains, illuminated the room. They gave just enough of their eerie light for the room's occupants to make out that the chain was not only still keeping the man alive, but it was also dangling his severed heart like it was a disgusting piece of garbage right in front of his face. The man shakily looked to Naruto. He stared into Naruto's eyes and was startled to see his eyes suddenly take to glowing pure blue. What are you? Stuttered the man in sheer terror before coughing as the foreign chakra from the chains pulsed angrily. Naruto simply looked at the man in distaste before eyeing the Kumo Hittite. Naruto stared at it for a tense few seconds before he glared once more at the man. The man and everyone else watching then bore witness as beautiful yet terrifying blue fire burned the man's heart to ashes. The man gurgled as the chain pulsed once more, as if reminding him that it was only the chain that kept him alive. Naruto followed the action by stomping the ground as hard as he could. He ignored the blood, and the action caused a large pillar of metal to rise up from the very foundations of the building. It was that metal pillar that impaled him from the floor, right through the stomach. Why you're not human, the man wheezed painfully. Why you're an angel of death. Naruto's frown and the narrowing of his glowing eyes was the only response the ninja received, and seconds later, the man's final vision was of the angel of death's chain opening into a blade-like point before it stabbed him right between the eyes, nailing his Kumo Hittite in the direct center. As the man slumped flat against the pillar of metal that had emerged from the floor, Naruto's figure could be seen under the moonlight that streamed through the windows. A breeze had begun to blow and Kaoru and Chiriku gasped at the image in front of them. Naruto stood there, his curtain-turned robe fluttering and his hacked-off white hair blowing lightly in the cool night air, his eyes still glowing while he caressed one of his chains in a dazed-like fashion. The golden chains swayed hypnotically to an unseen or unheard rhythm and Chiriku swore that the chains were humming, almost like they were purring under the touch of the angelic child. The cuts sealed themselves closed. The blood seeped back into his body and the bruises and angry marks covering his form were slowly absorbed back into his body, leaving nothing but blemish-free skin in its wake. Most likely the Kyuubi's doing, Chiriku thought silently. Then, in the blink of an eye, the spell was broken. Naruto's eyes returned to their beautiful blue and the mesmerizing golden chain shattered, leaving what looked like a gentle wave of cherry blossoms to disintegrate into wisps of golden chakra before fading completely. Naruto staggered in his spot for a moment before finally blinking and then running over to Yuki's body. He cried and screamed at the unfairness of it all. His cries alerted the rest of his new family, and he paused when that mutinous thought flickered through the front of his mind. Will they still want me? Naruto shook Yuki's body vigorously in his attempts to wake her, but Kaoru kept whispering lightly that she was gone. Naruto adamantly refused and the famous Uzumaki's stubbornness reared its head as he went right back to shaking Yuki's body. Once more, Naruto started to apologize over and over again until he felt arms gently circle around him, and he turned back to see his Keiruka-chan weeping. She held him comfortingly while the daimyo clenched his eyes shut and grated his teeth together, as he heard Naruto apologizing as if it was his fault, and it made Masahiko realize that it was an automatic response, like he was used to being blamed for everything. He heard Naruto telling Keiru that he could feel her heart beating, but she just continued whispering soothing things into Naruto's ears to comfort him, and after this continued for a further 10 seconds or so, Naruto snapped. He suddenly pulled himself from Keiru's grip and rushed back to Yuki's body. Naruto didn't quite understand what he was doing, but following on instinct, that he'd later learned was from Kurama's own knowledge, he elongated his teeth and bit down hard into Yuki's neck. Naruto ignored the horrified gasps of the others present as he channeled the pure energy that he used for bending. He pushed it into Yuki's veins and then let go. In the depths of Naruto's mind, Kurama was watching the whole series of events like they were a movie, and she wanted to scream in frustration that she couldn't help her little Naru. It wasn't fair. Finally Naru-chan had happiness and love, and in the blink of an eye it was ruined by some sick-minded man with clear mental issues. She watched everything with hateful cussing and steadily falling tears when she witnessed what had happened to Yuki. Something resonated with the mindscape from within Naruto's body, and she took a glance at the remaining seals. Her eyes widened at the impossibility of the current situation. The second was dissolving itself on its own. That meant that the seal could not hold back the power threatening to overcome the child that she'd gladly die for, and the power was destroying the seal itself. The emotions running through Naruto's body had accelerated the seal's absorption, and Kurama despaired at the cause, the reason why Naruto was feeling all of these emotions. Then Kurama felt the power and she gasped. That was Kushina's Kekkai Genkai, and the hidden and most feared Kekkai Genkai of the Uzumaki royal family, the fabled Uzumaki clan's Kongo Fusha or adamantine chakra chains. But something was different. The chains were purer than Kushina's ever were, and that scared Kurama. This shouldn't be possible. Kurama thought in fear. This power should have ended with Kushina. This power is pure. Naru-chan's chains are stronger. They're just like the very first Uzumaki chain wielder. Then she witnessed something just as unnerving. Naruto was displaying extremely advanced bending abilities if he was already powerful enough to bend metal so effortlessly. The progress that he was making and his potential would be godlike if he was learning at such a rate. She would have to meet with the fire daimyo through Naruto before it was too late. There were 2 seals remaining. One needed a seal master, and the other needed a potent blood source, and there were only 2 that would cut it. Uchiha blood or Senju blood, for while Naruto bore traces of Senju blood it wasn't potent enough, and while she detested the majority of the Uchiha for their role in her pain, and that of her little Naru's pain, it was necessary to free Naruto of the burden of being restricted further by a village that hated him for her. She would just have to be patient, but if something else happened to Naruto then she'd no longer be a passenger. No, she'd show them why people called her a demon. Oh Naru-chan, he could hear Kurama whisper consolingly, you might have been too late. The technique you used is called spirit transferal, and like its name says, you transfer spiritual energy to another, but your mother, oh little one, it might be too late. The fact that he could use that technique is rather scary. His progress is astounding, Kurama thought to herself. Kurama was then surprised when Yuki suddenly inhaled as if she'd been holding her breath. Her eyes didn't open though, and Naruto was worried that he'd done something wrong, though his Karane reassured him that despite her surprise in him using the spirit transferal technique, he'd used it correctly. Masahiko and Keiru rushed forward to take a visibly pale Naruto away from Yuki's body, and Chiriku was there seconds later confirming that Yuki was, in fact, alive. Naruto, who still believed that he'd done the technique wrong, had cried himself to sleep, his body mentally and physically exhausted. Keiru, who had taken Naruto after rushing forward, stood with Naruto in her arms and held him close with a fierce protectiveness burning in her eyes. She glared at Chiriku and simply commanded a single word, explain. Chiriku gulped, and upon seeing a similar look in his daimyo's eyes he sighed and launched into his report of the current circumstances. He left nothing out and described the sights, the smells and the sounds of the entire conflict before describing the death of the second man at Naruto's own hand. That's all well and good, but I was here, remember? Keiru bit out, still stressed out, especially after seeing her Naru-chan in such a state. What did Naru-chan do, and is Yuki really alive? Chiriku hummed thoughtfully, on no medic Keiru-sama, but yes, Yuki-sama is alive. He hesitated briefly before continuing on, technically speaking. Masahiko's fierce look prompted Chiriku to explain quicker. Her vitals have returned to normal and her wound is all but healed, but she had no reactions to being prodded. She may be brain dead. Lord Daimyo, the fire daimyo, and his wife looked as though they'd been physically struck. So, you're telling me that whatever Naruto did, it saved her life? Masahiko asked tentatively. Chiriku nodded thoughtfully. In a way, he saved her from physically dying, but we need someone like Tsunade Senju to confirm this. Masahiko nodded. All the more reason to push Tsunade and Jiraiya into acting on his summons, but he needed to act now, even if it did seem cold and heartless to do so. Chiriku, bring me the ambassador for Kumo at once, he ordered in a strict tone, one that did not quell the look of fury etched into his lord's face. Bring him to me to answer why an active Kumo shinobi is consorting with a missing nin to attack my family. My family is off limits. All the daimyo know this, so find out who is responsible for this so I may deal with them personally. They'll rue the day they messed with me and mine. Masahiko summoned another ninja monk, just like Chiriku, and ordered him to take Yuki to her quarters. Also summon the healers for her. I'll be along shortly. The ninja monk bowed and hastily did as ordered. Chiriku also bowed, and after a last glance to Naruto and then back to Kaoru, he disappeared shortly, leaving Masahiko alone with Kaoru and their adopted child. His wife whimpered and he circled his arms around her, holding bother her and Naruto close to him. You and Naruto should stay together tonight. I shall stay with Yuki. We'll summon a healer in a few hours when the sun is up for Naruto, but the healers will be here shortly for Yuki, he said softly. Kaoru nodded mutely, and then all three family members moved to the closest room, which happened to be Naruto's room, and she and Naruto snuggled under the blanket while Masahiko just held his wife's hand, gently squeezing it until he had to leave, as the healers had arrived. None of them besides the unconscious Naruto slept for the rest of the early morning, but they simply shared each other's warmth and comfort. Fire Daimyo Masahiko Shinji was not usually an angry man, but since he had met and adopted Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, he found himself furious with the current circumstances. His concubine wife, Yuki Kagae Shinji, was comatose, and possibly brain dead, murdered at the hands of an apparent missing nin that once hailed from Kumo, or the village hidden in the clouds. This missing nin was caught torturing his son Naruto for being too pretty, and had attempted to kill her for interfering. It didn't go so well, as Naruto did something that saved her life, but what he did was beyond their understanding. As if that wasn't enough, the man had a partner that still swore allegiance to Kumo, and its leader the Sandame Reikage. The Sandame Reikage was a man that had already been responsible for the attempted theft of the Dojutsu Kekkai Genkai, or bloodline known as the Byakugan. It was also known as the All-Seeing Wide Eye and belonged to the Hyuga clan of Konoha, and was one of the Sandai Dojutsu or three great eye techniques. The other two of the Sandai Dojutsu were the Sharingan of the Uchiha clan and the Rinnegan, whose origin was believed to be from the Sage of the Six Paths himself. The Sandame Reikage issued the order under the pretense of an alliance in the form of a treaty. Under the guise of an emissary, a chosen jounin would infiltrate and kidnap Hinata Hyuga, the eldest daughter of the clan head and main family, a man named Hayashi Hyuga. His plan backfired, however, when his jounin was killed whilst escaping Konoha by Hayashi himself. I made the best of a bad situation though and demanded the immediate surrender of Hayashi to Kumo to face punishment for the death of a dear family friend. The Hyuga clan had their way in the end when Hayashi's twin brother Hisashi Hyuga knocked his brother out and took his place. Hisashi Hyuga was born not even 5 minutes after his brother Hayashi, and was condemned to live in the branch family as a result. The branch family were branded with the Kago no Tori no Juin, or the caged bird curse seal. It was a seal that was barbaric in design, one that allowed the main family, who were free from being branded, to control the branch family using a single hand seal. In doing so, it inflicted an unfathomable amount of pain upon those that were branded, as it attacked the brain cells of the branch family member through the seal. Prolonged exposure from its affects caused permanent brain damage to the branch family members and was believed to cause the branch family members to die much younger and much quicker than their main family counterparts. The caged bird curse seal was implemented long before the Hyuga clan had joined Konoha, so they were exempt from submitting the design itself to the village, and as far as the village knew, it was designed to stop the theft of their dojutsu by destroying their eyes and all traces of the curse seal itself upon their deaths, which was also true but still not the whole truth. Hisashi, who pretended to be Hayashi, had the honor and the pleasure of literally spitting in the face of the Reikage before killing himself, and with him, his eyes. The Sandame Reikage was not a happy man but was unable to do anything about the situation, and silently stewed in his anger. If that wasn't enough, in his youth, it was the same man that suggested and had a team attempt to kidnap Naruto's biological mother Kushina Uzumaki as a genin for the Uzumaki royal family's famed Kongo Fusa or adamantine chakra chains. That plan was thwarted by Minato and the rest was history. Kushina and Minato fell in love, had Naruto, and then the events that unfolded shortly after led right back to this moment. Masahiko sighed tiredly and looked dejectedly towards the picture of Yuki on his desk. It was ironic to him. They'd finally adopted a child, but then Yuki was taken from them, whether it was temporary or permanent, before they could have their child. Yuki had been starting to get sick lately, and she had been excited to see the healers that were coming today by appointment. They were no longer needed for Yuki, but they were still going to be summoned to check on the adopted child of the Daimyo. They stayed and proceeded to give Naruto a full checkup under the critical gaze of Asuma Sarutobi, who had taken it upon himself to never let Naruto out of his sight. I guess in the end they were needed after all, he thought as he let out a heavy breath. He was thinking about Naruto, and what the healers had said earlier that morning. The healers had informed him that Naruto was in perfect health, aside from being malnourished of course, but they totally disregarded any mental issues that Naruto may have been suffering from. They did however recommend a special diet, and with a look of greed offered their services to stay on permanently for a fee of course. They had been escorted out quickly after that, and Masahiko had stormed into his throne room and began to brood while waiting for Chiriku to return with the Kumo ambassador. He felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes and he struggled to regain control of his emotions. He would weep in private for as cold as it seemed. Those living took precedence right now. His wife and child needed him, and the thought of venting on an ego-bloated idiot of an ambassador was awfully tempting as well. The daimyo was brought out of his thoughts by the booming sound of the door slamming open and for said idiot to swagger into the throne room like he owned the place, and Masahiko gritted his teeth in fury. He would greatly enjoy this. Your Excellency, the ambassador spoke weirdly. Why was he talking like that? Oh, this was the new ambassador, and he obviously thought that speaking through his nose made him sound more important. But that rude tone had to be dealt with. My name is Utakiro, and I am the new ambassador of Kumo for the Land of Fire. The ambassador looked like he had just gotten away with murder if the smirk was anything to go by, and Masahiko snapped. After standing and bringing himself to full height for extra intimidation, he sent a healthy dosage of ki across the room and glowered at the idiot in front of him. You vile, disgusting little shit stain. His booming voice echoed around the room, causing him to appear even more terrifying than before, and the fire daimyo's ki washed over the room so quickly and with such density that even Shiriku, who stood by the ambassador, shivered. How dare you address me so callously, vermin? I am not some common noble that you can puff yourself up and lord over. I am the sovereign ruler of the Land of Fire. I am Fire Daimyo Masahiko Shinji, so kneel down, ambassador. Kneel down before your superior. The man shook in fear and hit the ground faster than even some shinobi could manage, all the while blubbering and stuttering out apologies to the Fire Daimyo. Masahiko internally smirked at the man in front of him, while outwardly maintaining his ki. He didn't even bother to hide the disdain and visible disgust for the man in front of him. Narrowing his eyes, Masahiko continued, You shall address me properly in my court, vermin, for I am done playing games with you and your lord, the daimyo of the Land of Lightning. You will both answer to my demands from this moment forward, or you will face what will happen when I decide to no longer allow trade or commerce between our nations. The man seemed to gather his wits and retorted with a haughty sniff and a victorious reply of, You can't do that, as you don't even control half of the commerce or trade between our nations. The ambassador looked up with a smirk, only to piss his pants at the downright savage grin that had appeared on the Fire Daimyo's face. You and I both are well aware of the fact that I only control 25% of trade and commerce. True, the daimyo conceded, and spotting a smirk from the ambassador he paused, but then his grin turned vindictive. But I now also have access and control to the Uzumaki royal family's assets. The ambassador blinked and then laughed. Impossible. The last heir died almost 4 years ago in Konoha. You are only a steward of their accounts. You can't access them. He spat out Konoha like it was a foul-tasting thing, and thought he'd put the Fire Daimyo in his place, when he was interrupted from speaking further when the Fire Daimyo started laughing. It was a quiet chuckle at first, but it grew louder and then louder still. It grew until it bordered on hysterical and even crazy. The ambassador gulped and started sweating even more. This shouldn't be the response he was supposed to get. Eventually the laughing died down, but the tension and ki remained as thick as ever. You will not speak down to me, vermin. I am aware of what you were made to believe. The Fire Daimyo spat out harshly with a glare. The fact remains, though, that I have got control, and pardon me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the Uzumaki royal family currently controls 65% of trade and commerce for the entire elemental nations. It was 50%, but what kind of a steward would I be if I failed to increase their holdings and my position? The ambassador's sweating started to get worse, and he tried and failed to remove the horrible lump in his throat. That means that gulp, it's true, an heir still lives. Masahiko allowed his vicious smirk to grow, if that was possible, and added pressure. Masahiko knew he told Naruto to wait a year before any contact could be made, but he lied. And he did feel guilty about it, but he was concerned about his child's safety, and it seemed that now, after everything that had happened, he could release the identity without anyone else interfering. That also meant that Konoha and Hiruzen would know within the hour, but it was time. And even Hiruzen had no claim any further, as legally there was a time period of a month in which to file a protest, and that had passed before even arriving in the imperial capital. Yes, it's true, and now that brings me to another topic of interest. The heir that has now placed full control of the royal family's assets over to me until he or she reaches maturity is now also my heir apparent until such a time that I may be blessed with a child of my own. Though Masahiko wasn't going to take another concubine, he had decided that Yuki would be the only other woman in his life, and if Yuki didn't wake, both he and his first wife Kaoru weren't likely to move on from this tragedy. Looking to the ambassador, he noticed that he looked like he was going to pass out now for the final nail. That means that if I have no heir of my own, then upon maturity the entirety of the Fire Country's political and economic power is transferred to the sole heir of Yuzu's royal family, and that means that he or she would control a total of 90% of the elemental nation's economy. I'm sure you're smart enough to know that Yuzu's royal family already controls Konoha's political sway with 90% of their power, as well as controlling all treaties as well. Yep, the man was swaying and seemed dangerously close to passing out now, and Masahiko wanted to return to his wife and child. In conclusion, vermin, I hold all of the cards, and I am tired of your insolence and disrespect to me and mine. Tell your daimyo that I demand his presence at his earliest convenience, which I'm sure won't be long after you relay this message. But also inform him that if he sends you back, I will kill you and close all trade effective immediately. Now leave my palace and city, swine. The blubbering man actually managed to run out of the room, and he only tripped over himself 5 times before making it to his carriage. How was that, Chiriku? Masahiko asked smugly. And my lord daimyo? Chiriku asked shakily. Then gulping he continued, Sir, remind me never to piss you off. They shared a laugh before the daimyo turned serious once more. Chiriku, Inform Asuma that his new mission is to guard Naruto 24/7 from now on until we can assign him a suitable dual guard squad. It will work well since he will be training Naruto starting tomorrow anyway since Naruto unlocked his chakra chains last night. The Daimyo ordered with authority. Chiriku nodded but paused once he was called once more by the Daimyo. Have you managed to make contact with the people I summoned? He questioned with an intensity backing his voice. He was dead serious regarding this matter. Yes, my lord, we made contact with both Jiraiya and Tsunade but both declined to respond to your summons. They believe that you weren't serious or thinking straight when you ordered them to the capital. Masahiko Shinji frowned and he adopted a regretful look before taking a deep breath and looking towards Chiriku once more. He then activated a seal that transcribed his official laws and orders directly to the archives, the Shinobi Corps and Konoha. The seal worked as a medium. His voice would be converted to word and then, that word, once authorized by his seal as Fire Daimyo, would be transmitted to the aforementioned locations for the sake of recording his ruling. The only concern of the Daimyo was that, as the laws were instantly transmitted to Konoha, they would know immediately, and that added to their discovering his precious Naruto's location, meant that they would know within hours at the earliest, or a day at the latest. He had no choice. The two remaining Sannin needed to be reminded of their oaths as shinobi of Hai no Kuni. Then on this day and by the order of Fire Daimyo Masahiko Shinji, I do hereby strip the Toad Sage Jiraiya of no clan, and the Slug Sage Tsunade Senju of the Senju clan, of their traveling rights until such a time as they obey my summons. Their accounts and monies are also to be suspended, and in Jiraiya's case his publisher will be fined if he continues to print. Further disobedience will see his publisher tried for treason if he distributes any works by the Toad Sage until further notice. He took a breath and licked his lips before continuing. If contact is made and further ignored I brand them. He paused and let out a heavy and pained breath. I brand them as missing Nin and order a kill on sight command to all shinobi with a posted bounty to be announced after a 2-week period. If they further disobey my summons after this 2-week period then I shall mark them in the Elemental Nations bingo book with an increased bounty befitting their titles, rank and skill. I have spoken and my words are now law. I now stamp this transcription with my official seal. Masahiko dipped his ring in the special wax and pressed it down on the scroll hard. So it is done, and so has my word become law. Chiriku gasped and glanced to the Fire Daimyo with a look of confusion. He refrained from speaking his questions out loud though, after seeing the raw pain on the Daimyo's face. It was clear that he was greatly unsettled with his order and understanding dawned on Chiriku's face. He then understood that the ruling of his lord was mostly there to be a warning, but now that it was stamped it would be difficult to overturn, even if it was the Daimyo who ordered it in the first place. Go and relay my orders to Asuma, the Daimyo began and after a sigh continued, I have decided to aid in the search of replacements to my guardians personally. I will have them take the oath just as you and Asuma have before them. Until such a time I will have the Fire Temple monks substitute as security detail. Chiriku nodded with approval and understanding. The monks from the temple had grown complacent, and this would reignite their passion and way of life. Their appointment to the Fire Daimyo's security detail would also encourage them to train harder as well. So it was with a smile that he nodded his consent and left to fulfill the orders of his leader. True to Masahiko's assumption, Konoha did know within the following hours of what occurred between the Kumo ambassador and the Fire Daimyo, and it is with this that we find the Hokage. Hiruzen was pacing the length of his office whilst trying to soothe his oncoming migraine. He looked to the Jounin and his advisors Koharu Yutane and Hamura Mitokado that he had assembled to discuss the issue at hand. Naruto was with the Fire Daimyo, the worst possible outcome for Konoha, as the child would be well aware of his heritage by now, and that spelled trouble. If Naruto had become aware of his heritage and the political power that he wielded, then Konoha could be ruined. Just as the Sandaime was about to address their issue, he was interrupted by something that didn't make their situation any easier. The transcription attendant had burst into his office and shakily handed the new stamped law from their Fire Daimyo. Hiruzen paled and his advisors soon followed after reading the document. The Jounin looked to the Hokage in confusion. After the Jounin were informed of their newest law, they all waited for the dismissal to follow out the will of the Daimyo. Hiruzen nodded tiredly, and they burst out of the office at top speed to notify the surrounding outposts. We need to contain this Hiruzen, Hamura stated instantly, though I believe the entire village will know within the day. Indeed, Koharu agreed. It'll be too late to contain anything, the Sandaime replied. Just do me a favor and retrieve a courier Nin. We need to get Naruto back. True to the comment of the elder, the talkative shinobi had already begun to spread the word through the streets. Soon the entire village knew the news and many paled like the Hokage before them. The child that they had tormented and called abomination and demon brat held that much power? They knew they were screwed and many began praying to the previous Hokage for help and guidance. Ironically, most prayed to the fourth Hokage for aid in this time of confusion and crisis. Itachi Uchiha had been searching for her younger brother Sasuke when she learned of the news and she let out a sigh. It was only a matter of time, I suppose. The village has had this coming and now they're screwed. She spotted Sasuke and gave a small smile when he noticed her presence. He still called her big brother but it didn't matter. As long as Sasuke remained this carefree and happy, she was happy. Sasuke ran up to her and pulled on her arm, trying to drag her in the direction